Welcome, everybody, to Flat Earth Nation. Mudflood was Armageddon. Don't let them tell you anything else unless they're willing to debate you in a fair and honest way. I had such a fun time yesterday, and I will be keeping up with this on my phone. But for now, I'm going to go down and visit with Tommy. So I'm going to start the largest video. I have 7 videos that take a little over 3 hours, but they're all, hidden history. Can you tie in mud flood? And you don't need me to come to an understanding of where you're at in the truther moment. So let's just wait and check it out. No, I don't want to. And here you go. Hi, Sean. I'm going to be, I'll be back later to share in the chat. But for now, we are going to be, we have 3 hours of hidden history.
Discovered, or has brought to the public realm. And it has to do with the myths of the California gold rush, as I'm titling this series. I think this is number 11 or number 12. Again, everything is a lie, nothing is true. So let's bring out the truth, let's bring out the lies, let's disseminate between the two. The California Gold Rush, 1849. That's why the San Francisco 49ers are called the 49ers, because allegedly all of a sudden gold was discovered by John Marshall at Sutter's Mill in the hills of the Sierra Nevadas, and everybody came streaming to California for the great gold rush. They got on their covered wagons, they brought their pans, and they brought their axes, and they traveled across country for months. Where'd they get the food? And how did they get horses fed? And where'd they get water from? And they had to cross the deserts, and yada, yada, yada. And this meme has been played into our minds over movies, over classic Westerns, over and over and over. How many dozens and dozens and hundreds of Western movies can you name? This little map right here is all the gold that they've found, discovered, and claims and whatnot. And this is the storyline. I've been working on the railroad all live long day. So they had the narrow gauge, the short gauge, different types of railroads, and they had the pick and axes, and they had the labor where they had the steel iron rails that they laid down, and they had to cut the logs, and they had to grade it while a guy with a hat stands over with his hands on his waist, says, "Working, boy? You're not working hard enough, boy." All right, here's a picture of how they created with horse and buggy. See all the horse and buggies, how they postured here? How did they build these mounds? And look at this tree in the foreground. It's all delimbed and stuff. How did they delimb all these trees? We're going to get into that more. All right, so here, just to give a little backdrop, a little background, 1890. Look at all the railroads. From 1880 to 1890 was one of the most rapid expansions, 70,300 miles of new lines. Now remember, they've got to lay the tracks. They've got to get the iron, the rails. They even going around curves. They got to make them specifically for the curves. They got to cross bridges, trestles, everything else. And all of a sudden, they got all these railroads going all across the countries, all the way up north, all the way down south, all over California in the 1880s, 1890s. Now, the first railroad in California, this is from Sacramento Union, 1856, on the 7th of August, a trial trip was made on the opening of the road to 7th Street. So here they have a locomotive with some people in a train, and they got the train tracks and everything. Remember that, 1856. So we have the 1849 gold rush. We had the 1846 to 1848 massacre of the brown people, which I covered in a previous video. Myths of the California gold rush, part 10, I believe. And just showed how they eliminated scalps for bounty for lands. First governor of California, Burnett, gave prohibitions to the more brown people you kill, the more land you get. Founding of the state of California was 1850. So 1848, Mexican War, slaughter, massacre, genocide. 1848, 1849, California gold rush, and 1850 statehood, all within 2 years. And then by 1856, we got railroads, and they're laying the tracks. But what's interesting about this picture, look on the right. Okay, telegraph systems, they already had them in place before the railroads were up. How did they set these poles? How did they get the wire? There's no wires here either. It was wireless. They had it back then. So this is what we're told, we're sold, is how they laid tracks through these deep caverns. This is up the Eel River by Paradise, where they attacked Paradise. And you can see these tracks being laid right through here, through solid rock. Pick an axe or some buggy, pick an axe. And I'll get into how they didn't have any dynamite until the 1880s, 1890s. And then it was very probable because it was so unstable. And again, here's another picture. They're selling you, oh, here's the guys with the pick and axe, and they're just cutting through the granite and just going on steep slopes. And then we're going to bring the reel in. And oh, here's the lumber that we have perfectly cut. Where's the lumber mills? How did they cut lumber like this, right? Where did they get the steel from? And then this is a picture of a train. I think this is a shade. There's different types we'll get into. But these weigh several tons, 10 to 20 tons. And so here you see the trestle coming across the road. Across around, watching with his hands in his pockets with a roundabout to turn the train around. Because I always wondered, with the Transcontinental Railroad that was put in 1869 that finally got cross country, it always had one track. So it could only go one way. So one train could go one way, and then it had to turn around and go the other way. And then if before that, well, we'll get into that in a minute. But here we see trestles that were massively trestles. 1860, they're making these trestles across these huge gorges. It looks like lumber or steel, and these trains were going across it. Who engineered that? Who made that? Look at this trestle over here with all these guys standing on here in these deep creeks and these deep ravines. Oh, by the way, where's the lumber coming from? You see any hills? You see any trees over here with any hills? Horse and buggy. And then they have to strip the branches and move them with hand saws, right? Cross saws. That's how they did it. Here's another one. Construction of the Transcontinental Railroad across Devil's Gates Bridge, Utah, 1869. Well, that looks like steel to me. Well, maybe that's wood. That's wood over here. But this could be steel. And then they got the steel tracks. And look at the granite. Look at what they had to cut through. Through Utah, through the Wasatch Mountains? Yeah, right. Horse and buggy. And again, look at these locomotives. Look at how big they are. And again, what I want you to pay attention to is in the background. See all the stripped trees here? See how they stripped all the branches? Why would they strip all these branches and leave the trees if they're not going to use them to make the wood? And then look at all these logs that are perfectly cut and all the bark is off of them. And then this long train is pulling. And here's the guy standing in front to show you the images. Look at this trestle. Again, how did they do this? What kind of engineers in the late 1850s, 1860s was able to engineer to such perfection that they had to order the rails? Now remember, they had to order the rails from the East Coast to get the rails, to get the trains, to get everything by ship. Because it wasn't until 1869 that the railroad didn't cross country, so they had to do it by ship. All the way around the Cape of South America, all the way back to the East Coast, 6 to 8 months, place their orders. How did they place their orders? We don't know. They had no communications back then. Again, look at the trestles they built. This is out here in Mendocino. And look at the gorge they had to cover. Who designed this? Who engineered this? Where did they get the calculations to get it so perfect and on a straight line? This was not horse and buggy technology. And by the way, they came out for the California gold rush. They came to get gold. They didn't get to build trains. And I'm going to show you that in the 1850s, 1880s, there was massive railroads already in place, put in place. Again, look at the trees in the background, all denuded. And then look at these massive trestles coming in here over and over. These are guys standing, so you get an idea how massive these trestles are. 1,100 feet, 130 foot high, May Creek in Washington. You're gonna ride a train on that? And again, look at these posts, how elaborate and how structured they are to come to the point 110 feet high above the ground. How did they anchor the posts into the ground? Again, here's a little closer up of that transcontinental one. Again, here's the man standing here. And again, it's just beyond the pale, the construction. Here's a guy standing by the creek. So they had to cross the creek. They had to bridge it across. How did they get across? How did they get the wood? Where did they get the lumber? Where did they get the rail lines? Again, this is out in Mendocino. Look at these stanchions here. Look at these poles into the hard rock bed to get the steam engines. And here's the logs and the steam engines going across. It's beyond the pale. And why would they put it right on the side of the sea? This is the Pacific Ocean. This is the Mendocino coast here. And again, this is another one of the Mendocino coast areas. And you see two tracks. They got one track here, you got the trains going on here, and they got another track here. What kind of engineers were able to do this? And then here's another one. I mean, it just boggles my mind that this hasn't been brought up in questions before. But again, on sandy beaches, okay, you got the water coming in, you got the tides coming in and out, you got the water being subverted, the structures below. How did they know? And again, look at the telephone poles. Look at the wireless technology. Look at how they cut it along the granite. Again, this is up in Oregon, all along the Oregon coast. This is how the whole north coast, all the way, Northern California, all the way up to Oregon, is shaped with these sheer cliffs. Yet they were able to put trains going all the way around these sheer cliffs without dumpsters, without buckets to heavy equipment to lift all the rock and to move it in place. And again, setting the standards, setting the post down into the ground. And look at these. They had to ship these, order these from all the way from the East Coast, and then ship them all around, and then reassemble them all, and then put them on tracks and hope the tracks are the right width. Yeah, come on. Again, this is Oregon, 1846, the first railroad. 1851, the Cascade Railroad Company becomes the first railroad in Washington Territory. Remember, horse and buggy, 1849, 49ers, and all of a sudden 1848 is when they discovered gold, and by 1849, everybody started coming. In 1851, they're already up in Washington building railroads, 5.9 miles. Does that make any sense to anybody? Sure doesn't make sense to me. In 1958, construction begins on the Oregon Portage Road, the first true railroad in Oregon, 4.5 miles. Again, crossing waters. It's not easy land. It's not easy to do in any way, shape, or form. All right, so let's check out these logs, because this is what's really impressive. Again, the guy standing in front, selling it. Look at the elaborate lighting. All right, and then they got the wood that burns the coal, it burns the furnace to create the power to run the engines here. And then they got another track going this way, and this is where they log the logs. And then these things on the side is the bark that they've peeled off. So you get an idea what we're looking at here as we go forward with these pictures. All right, so here's a little montage I put together in my neck of the woods. And this is going up and down the California coast, up in Northern California and Mendocino. Here's Fort Bragg. For those of you who know Mendocino. Coast. Here's Mendocino right here, Little River. So you get an idea where I'm going with this as I scroll down. So I put the dates in when all these lumber companies were founded and established along the coast, the north coast. Up above is the Lost Coast up here. But these are all lumber yards. And you can see up here in the corner, they had to build these elaborate feeding systems to feed the lumber, the wood, down onto ships because, as I said, the coastline of California is rocky and ragged and full of rocks. The ships couldn't come into harbor. So they literally had to build these. You'll see some more of this. I'll show you. But here you can see 1878, 1872, 1877, 1864, 1857, 1885, 1852. And these are railroads they got. They put in railroads in these times too. Look at the railroad right here. Okay, they already got railroads. This is 150 miles north of San Francisco, to give you an idea. So all the ships come into San Francisco harbor, and then they get off and they run for the gold rush. Now there's no gold. Oh, we're going to go up and start harvesting lumber, right? So this is a lumber mill. This is a new forest. They're doing on sailing ships, and the steamships just started. And again, look at the massive wood they were hauling, and they're already debarked. We're going to get into that in a minute. All right. So just to give you an idea, I just took this from some I saw out here about what it would take to get from San Francisco Bay, and went there from Napa and then by stage. So they had this witness of which one of the adversaries pulled a gun and shot the other. So then Bodega Corners and stayed a day or two with Captain Smith, and Mr. Ford bought 8 yoke of oxen, hiring 2 men to help him with mules and oxen. So this guy's coming up to start a lumber mill and harvest all the old Sierra redwoods. And just to give a note, we'll get into a little more of these Sierra redwoods, the sequoias, the oldest trees in the world. And it was the harvest, it was the natural resources of the world until the 1820s. And that's when they were able to cross country by 1849. That's when this all started, once California stopped being an island. So here, the hiring 2 men to help them with mules and oxen. So you got the mules and oxen, you got to drive the mules and oxen, you got to feed the mules and oxen, you got to yoke the mules and oxen, you got to rein the mules and oxen. And from there, he proceeded up the coast by slow stages, camping wherever night overtook them. There were no roads, only rough, narrow trails, and they had to swim the swollen rivers. Oh, with your oxen, you're going to swim the swollen rivers? How? Crossing one of them, probably the Guala boundary between Mendocino and Sonoma counties. 1 mule drowned and the other swam downstream, got ashore, and ran away. This was a real calamity, for besides losing the mules, the party lost all its provisions and blankets. Therefore, they only had saddle blankets or sweat cloths to sleep under, and for 36 hours they had nothing to eat but some berries they gathered along the trail. Then they reached what Ford referred to as the Portuguese Ranch near the Navarro River. This is in Anderson Valley near Ukiah in Mendocino County, by where I live. And they got their first square meal in nearly 2 days, replenished their provision, and rested for 2 days. Finally, and again, the Portuguese were already here. The Portuguese Ranch were already established there. I think this is 1850s. So finally, after 10 days of hard, slow travel, they reached the mouth of the big river, which Ford ultimately called Rio Grande and Buldon. The former name was used by the Spanish, and the latter's own version, the Indian name, Buldam. So the Spanish were already here. The Portuguese were already here. They're already naming these lands. All right, so big river likewise means large stream. It was a lumber from the Mendocino sawmills, later renamed the Mendocino Lumber Company, that helped materially to rebuild San Francisco of its money conflagrations in the 1850s. It was the Mendocino sawmills that had with it claimed to have been the first railroad in California, a mile of track in which oxen pulled cars of lumber from the mill up to the chute of the point. It was the Mendocino sawmills that provided the first cargoes of lumber for the little 2-masted schooners, which became so much a part of life in the history of the Mendocino coast. And it was the Mendocino sawmills that founded the town of Mendocino and made it for years the most important shipping center and community on the whole Mendocino coast. Oh, really? So here's a map from around 1587, and there's over 250 maps in the Stanford Library of California being an island, okay? And here you see Mexico, Grenada. That's the brown people I covered in the previous video, part 9. Very important video to understand. Here's the Wasatch Mountains. Here's the Great Salt Lake. And notice there's nobody inhabiting this whole area in here because it was all water until it flooded out. And once it flooded out, California no longer became an island. That's why we have the Salton Sea down by Los Angeles. That's why you have the Great Salt Lake of salt, because it was an ocean. Not millions of years ago, 100, 200 years ago, back in the 1810s, the 1820s. And this is how they were able to finally cross. This became the Sierra Nevadas, and finally cross into California. All right, so check this out. So again, 1587 or so, and check this out right here. What does that say right there? Mendocino, Cape Mendocino. 1587, they already had Mendocino on the map. Again, history is written by his story. History is written by the winners. All lies. All right, so moving on. So this is a story about building the oxen, bringing the oxen And again, look at how they had to clear all this area in order to put these wood in. And then they had to cut the wood. And then they had to, well, first they had to cut the trees, delimb them. And then they had to cut them and lay these logs down under here. And then the next cross one under here. And then the final ones across here, just so they could get it, so they could haul the logs through these ravines that they had to cut somehow, or with, with hand saws, with picks, shovels, that's how they did it. And then they had to feed these animals and yoke them and train them to walk across these lumber. Does that look very stable to you? Would these animals want to do that? And where's the person leading these animals? Well, why are they just standing there? And then you see the big logs being pulled in the background, which they had to have heavy chains to wrap around in order to secure them. And again, look at the cow, look at the oxen, being pulled. And again, the denuded forest. And you see in the background, why would they trim all these trees if they're not going to cut them down and use them? And then how did they get up there and trim them, right? There's just so many questions. And then here you can see like a big ravine right here, and all of a sudden this lumber is going to go under the ravine, and then they've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Where's the other oxen over there? It looks like one's missing. 14 oxen pulling, and then you got the shards from the branches being clipped and trimmed, right? But again, the denuded forest, what does that look like? Looks like the same Wi-Fi directed energy weapons that were used up in Paradise. They just burned out the forest, is my take on it. Look at this. Denuding the forest. This is before clear cutting came about. This was just to get the redwoods, because the redwoods were so valuable. And then they were so in need of being able to harvest these huge, massive logs, that they had to make these gigantic steel wheels. Well, if you work with steel or iron at all, how hard is it to make one of these? How did it get there? Is the early 1900s Mendocino County. Horse teams pull lumber through wheels. So here they're saying in the early 1900s, they're still using horse and buggy and these giant wheels to move these giant lumbers. And again, you got the guys with the hats standing there with their suspenders, looking on saying, yeah, we're doing the heavy lifting. Again, look at the cut. Look at how perfect that cut is. You're going to tell me a hand cross saw did that? Then how did they load that onto this? How did they take this lumber that weighs tens of tons, this wood, and hoist it in lumber and lay it on there and balance it on these wheels? Oh, and then they had to make the trails and the tracks for these wheels to go through to get it out to the coast to put it on the ships. Over and over. They had to clear out this whole area, picks and shovels. See, I always lay the picks and shovels over here to show you. And then look at these logs. They're already stripped. How did they strip them? And then they had to lay them in line. And why did they lay them so wide? So the horses could be pulling these logs. And then they pull it out. They take it down to the coast. They come back, get another log, pull it out. And then there was the invention of the steam donkey. This was around 1880s, 1890s. The steam donkey, steam engines started coming in, and they had these cables which would run on these winches, and it would haul the wood as they wrapped them around. And here you got the horse and buggy in the foreground. Hey, we got some water for you. So here, again, these big mechanical instruments, and how did they get them all the way up to Mendocino, all the way up to Humboldt County and Trinity counties to harvest all this lumber? You tell me. Check this picture out. So this is a train. Here's 2 pair of tracks, which is, again, the curved tracks. They had to order these curves perfectly to align with what they wanted to do. Now you've got these marshes here, and as you know, marshes fill up, marshes go down, marshes sink, and they're building these all over these marshes, these flatlands of marshes. What did they have to do to secure it so these rails didn't sink or didn't become uneven? And then look at the massive size of these logs. How did they load them onto the trains? Anybody? How did they put them on there? Okay. Then how did they strip all the bark? Okay, you can strip the bark on this side, this side, this side, but how do you turn it over to strip the bark on the bottom? Oh, wait. These weigh tens of tons. This is old redwood, old sequoia redwoods. All right, so I put together this here, another question I have. So this picture on the left, here's a handsome gentleman with his hand in his pocket, standing at this tree. And again, you've got the pick and axe, the pick and axe. They always have the pick and axe. But look at the cuts, okay? Look at how perfect the cut lines are. All right. Oh, we're using a saw, a hand saw. Oh, really? Well, this is how they said they did it. They get these things called springboards, and these springboards they stand on, and then he's got the mallets, which he takes in, and then they take the cross saws, and you see him using the cross saws standing on the springboards. And then these holes here are what they cut to stand on, to do that, to cut these massive trees, okay? This is what they're saying they stand on. So again, these springboards here is part of the whole storyline of how they cut these massive 3,000-year-old giant sequoias. And again, this one on the right, the giant man standing here. Okay, so this, you see this cut here, like a 30, 33, 40 degree angle here. This is what they do to fell the tree. They'll cut the bottom and then they'll cut the side so it falls over on one side in the direction they want. The only problem I have here is, where's the stump it came from? Is it here? No. Is it here? No. Is it here? No. Again, they had to cut this, and look at the perfect cuts. If you take a chainsaw and you cut like that, that's the kind of markings you get with a chainsaw. Then they had to debark it. Then they had to cut them up, and then they had to haul them out, and then they had to put them on ships or trains. How? 1860s, 1870s? This is up in Humboldt. And all these perfect, clean cuts. Not a mark like an axe, not a mark like a cross saw, which would be uneven. So here's the cross saws they said they used. And you see this all the time, these massive cross saws. Now think about how they would cut this. How they would cut this is they'd have to get one guy on one side and pull one guy on the other side. And then they'd stand on their springboards. See these springboards here, and then they pull back and forth. Well, here they're standing on these springboards and they're cutting this wood, except I got a question for you. How did they make this uppercut? How did they cut it at this diagonal of almost 45 degrees? Where's the springboard marks in there? And then how did they do it? And if anybody's ever tried to use a chainsaw to cut trees, once you start cutting into the tree and the tree starts to get compromised, what happens? It sinks down onto your chainsaw. And it's really hard to get the chainsaw out. Oh, by the way, all the sap and everything coming out of the trees also ruins the saw, where you can't pull it. And we'll get into this picture here. This was lumber they sent back to the San Francisco and Chicago exhibitions. All right, so here's again the springboard with the saw standing here and the guy laying in it. So they make a cut here and they make a cross cut here and then they cut it from the back. But can you imagine taking the handle of this saw, standing on this little wooden platform with 10, 15 feet to drop if you miss on this little plank of wood, and pulling and pushing and pulling and pushing? And again, where's the springboard cuts here to make this angled cut? Again, these are the slots they use. So they did these springboard cuts to cut this massive tree down called the mammoth tree. And they springboarded all the way up, and they got all the way up here to fell this giant tree. So this is what you'd expect to see if you took an axe and you started cutting away. It would be uneven cuts. There'd be uneven cuts like this. And here they're standing on the springboards and they're making their uneven cuts to debark the wood. Why are they debarking? So look at how much effort it takes to debark the wood. But again, it's not clean like you saw. Let me get back to that picture so you can see. Again, I'll go down. There's more clean cuts here. But again, how clean were those cuts they made, like right here? Look at how perfectly clean those cuts are. Did they use lasers? Did they use advanced technology? Can you still make those same kind of clean cuts today? All lies, folks. Massive, massive lie. Oh, here you go. All right, so here. So this is markings coming from inside these trees here. And so again, no springboards to stand on. Springboards down here. We're showing you how we did it. Here's an axe. We did it with an axe. Yeah, 20 guys working 5 days, you know. That's what the story is. I'll get into in a minute. But here we see the Redwood diameter, 26 feet. This is up in Seattle. But again, look at how perfect the cuts are. There's no chipping. There's no, like we saw in those previous pictures whatsoever. Perfectly clean cut all the way through, perfectly level, perfectly even. And again, debarking. Here they are sitting on this wood. How do you debark the, how do you roll this over to debark the bottoms? All right, so in the span of 8 weeks last summer, 2 extreme hunters discovered believed to be the 3 tallest trees in the world. The redwood tree, as I said, in the California coast is where we're talking here, the Mendocino coast, Sonoma, not Sonoma, I'm sorry. Sonoma, Mendocino, and Humboldt and Trinity counties. And here you can see the size of these trees, a 10-story building to give you a size 380 feet tall. All right, so some of the mammoth trees they cut down, this is called the mammoth tree. Here's a picture of it. The mammoth tree painting, again, 1854, horse and buggy, 1854, there's your horse. And look at how size of these holes in these trees were. So the mammoth tree, a wood engraving picture of the remains of the mammoth tree was printed in 1862. The author reported in the Grove area there were 103 big trees, 20 of which exceeded 75 feet in circumference at the base. The mammoth tree, known as the big tree, was the namesake of the mammoth tree in Calaveras County. This is up in the Sierra Nevadas, the jumping capital of the world. She measured 302 feet in height and 96 feet in circumference at the time she was chopped down in 1853. So 1849, they come for gold. They come around by 1853. They're chopping down the biggest trees in the world. Two men are measuring the enormous 20-foot in diameter stump at which a dance floor was later constructed, large enough for 40 people. The sign of the butt end of the trunk warns all persons are forbid taking any wood from this tree. The Mammoth Tree Grove was the first grove of the ancient sequoias to be, quote, discovered in the Sierra Nevadas by Euro-Americano white people in 1852. Although it has been a major tourist attraction ever since, the grove was not protected from logging until 1931, when the Calaveras Tree Park says, okay, no more, we already took them all, so let's now make it official, we're not going to take any more trees. So in 1967, it was finally expanded and includes the second Southern Grove. So this tree employed 5 men for 22 days in felling it, not by chopping it down, but by boring it off with pump augers. After the stem was fairly severed from the stump, the uprightness of the tree and the breadth of its base sustained its position. To accomplish this feat of throwing it over, about 2.5 days of the 22 were spent inserting wedges and driving it in with the butts of the tree until at last the noble monarch of the tree was forced to tremble and then to fall after braving the battle in the breeze of nearly 3,000 winters. 3,000 years it stood till the Euro-American white trash man came and destroyed it for bored feet. This is why we must pass rights of nature to protect nature. So hundreds of trophy stereo views of the Mammoth Tree produced showing the bark strip section of her trunk with the auger marks clearly visible. Engravings were executed using the stereo views. The destruction of the Mammoth Tree was to convert her to lumberwood to profit from her display. Consequently, her bark and cross-section were sent around Cape Horn to New York City. The exhibition was a failure as the viewers did not believe the big relics to be authentic. So they're taking these trees from California and they're shipping them all the way around the coast on boats. After, California gold rush, everybody's coming here to mine gold. And all of a sudden they're ditching all the boats in the San Francisco harbor because they're all running up the gold rush. So no ships are going back. And, and then they're putting trees on boats in the 1880s, 1890s for these exhibitions. And this is the stump. Here's the augering. So this is a different method where they're putting like drills into the bottom of the wood to break it apart. All right, so the Pomo indigenous peoples who lived along the Russian River were driven from their homes in the 1850s and 1860s by, quote, white men settlers, and they were massacred and hunted for bounty by militias. The rich biodiversity of the Northwest coast is reflected in many languages and cultures of the indigenous people, which are among the most varied in the world. In the wake of the late 19th century colonization of British Columbia, the Aboriginal title and rights were ignored and the people were displaced. Raw resources continue to be stolen from unceded lands and vast profits are made that do not benefit First Nations. An illustration by Haiti artist pictures the insatiable monster of gluttony gobbling up forest of Haiti Gouai right. Canada's refusal in 2007 to sign the UN Convention on Indigenous Rights exposes the influence of multinational resource extraction industry in frustrating the legal and moral obligation of Canada to settle Aboriginal land claims. So this is up in Canada and British Columbia. A little sidebar here. In Canada, this is just out today, Canada judge dismissed by challenge the Trudeau administration to a ruling that found the government underfunded First Nations children's services. The Canadian government was ordered to pay billions in compensation for the murder of the children, the Indigenous brown people, many of whom were forced into foster cares as they had to leave their homes to access government service. They were forced. This day comes as Canada marked its first ever National Day of Truth and Reconciliation Thursday in honor of the lost children and survivors of the government and church-run schools for Indigenous children. Gatherings took place across Canada, including Toronto. Every single day, all of us are just fighting to get our culture back, and it was unfair of us to lose it. We should be living our lives on our reservations and our lands and getting our land back. And it's hard seeing all these people just protesting like this genocide. We're protesting a genocide. It's very emotional. And guess what Trudeau did the same day on his Truth and Reconciliation Day? He went surfing. The guy doesn't give a shit. He's a Jesuit. And again, the natives, remember the Jesuits, the Dominican friars and everything came in the 1700s to the northwest. And then these ancient trees located in the present day Germany, the monks' purpose was to convert the pagans who opposed cutting down of sacred trees, especially oaks, by the church. The Christian doctrine that human beings should master nature continues to be a justification for old growth, clear-cut logging and deforestation throughout the world. Though many believe that the conversion of ancient forests into industrial tree plantations is an ecological crime. Hear, hear. Big trees remind us of the wild nature landscapes that have taken most of human history to evolve, and their destruction for pulp, paper, and wood products is unconscionable. In 1862, the British colonies of the northwest coast were hit by a devastating epidemic that took the lives of 1/3 of indigenous people in 2 years. 1/3, they wiped out the brown people, the Tartarians, the Copperheads in 2 years, bringing over their smallpox, cholera blankets. But the Argonaut disregard for their faith and the illegal stealing of First Nations lands and resources became the trademark of the settlers of the Society of British Columbia. The ancient red cedar specimen that survives in Cathedral Grove, which I'll get into in a minute, represents a critical species to First Nations. For 1,000 years, these people developed the tools and technologies to fell giant cedars that grew in profusion. They used the rot-resistant wood for graceful dugout canoes to travel coastal waters, massive post and beam houses in which to live, steamboat boxes for storage, monumental carved poles to declare their lineage, and dramatic trance masks to evoke the spirit world. Every part of the cedar had a use. The versatile inner bark they wove into intricately patterned mats and baskets, plied into rope, and proceeded to make the soft, warm, yet water-repellent clothing so well suited to the rain coast. Tough but flexible withes made lashing and heavy-duty rope. The roots they wove into watertight baskets embellished with strong designs. For all these gifts, the North Coast people held the cedar and its spirit in high regard, believing deeply in its healing and spiritual powers. Respectively, they addressed the cedar as long life maker, life giver, and healing women. I'm just going to keep reading down, then I'll get back to the images. The Grand Redwood Forest of Sonoma County were early stripped by the logging companies that supplied a building boom in San Francisco. At first, the logs were floated down the rivers to the coastal mills, then transported by ship to the Bay Area. When completion in 1877 of the North Pacific Coast Railroad, deforestation greatly increased. The largest redwoods grew in the Russian River watershed, which was settled by the white Euro-Americanos in the 1860s. So here we see Stumptown was the first settled in 1860 on the bank of the Russian River, an alluvial flat known as Big Bottom. Now the ancients, the redwoods, they love alluvial soil. They love sandy soil. They love water soil, and they also get water from the coast, from the coastal fog, which we don't get anymore because they're engineering all the weather. So around here, these massive sequoias are dying off. You can see it. They're turning pale after 3,000 years. So Stumptown, 1860, Rougher River, named after the hollow stump, which stood in the village, in which 20 horses could stand on the stump. Big Bottom was described as a dense growth of mammoth redwood trees and would yield 800,000 feet of lumber to the acre. The largest tree measured 18 feet in diameter. Then a Swiss settler, and you see a lot of Swiss settlers coming in Marshall was from Switzerland. Switzerland had a big presence in the California gold rush. Why is Switzerland never attacked in World War I or II? Why is Switzerland hold the Rothschilds, Basel, Switzerland, the Bank of International Settlements, all clear trades? Switzerland. In 1865, Swiss settler Gurney arrived in Stumptown. This is what the town of Guerneville is named after, and set up a sawmill. So here he's setting up sawmills in 1865 before the Transcontinental Railroad was even here. He's setting up sawmills. How do you set up a sawmill? How do you get the parts? How do you get the communications to the East Coast to order all your stuff from? When there's no communication lines, there's no telegraph, there's no mail. You have to sell them by boat. By the end of the century, all big trees were gone from the big bottom, leaving a barren floodplain of stumps. In 1998, Sonoma's redwood groves, many with trees ranging in diameter from 15 to 20 feet, had almost all been cut down. It has been poetically said that the groves were the god's first temples, and if this is true, then he had no grander nor more picturesque temples on earth than the primeval forest of Sonoma County. The tallest standing tree yet discovered in America was the product of Sonoma County. This tree grew upon the west bank of Fife Creek, just opposite the town of Guerneville, was known to all the early settlers on the Russian River as the monarch of the forest. It was one of the finest specimens of redwoods that is ever seen by man. It measured 45 feet in circumference at the base and 367 feet, 8 inches tall. Football field is 300 feet. Think about how tall that is. The tree was felled 25 years ago, converted to lumber. The tree was 23 and 300 feet high, as we said. Made upwards of 600,000 board feet and afforded labor for 2 years. The shingles were sold and brought to their maker for $1,800. So they took down the largest tree of monarch of the forest, 300 feet tall, been sitting there for 3,000 years, and they got $1,800 out of it. The Baptist Church of Santa Rosa, here's all the religion guys taking down the trees. We dominate nature. We're the providence. Because we can, because it's God's providence to take down the trees, because we can, and we own it. The Baptist Church of Santa Rosa, wholly from the product of the tree just mentioned. Every part of the wood material came from the tree: the timbers, the siding, the shingles, the flooring, the scantleys, the doors. A person not familiar with the vast size of Sonoma redwood can, from the contemplation of this, form some idea of the magnitude of these mammoth trees. Guerneville tree was over 30, and the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, and it was 1,000 years old at the time of the birth of Alexander the Great. It was over 17 feet in diameter, as shown by the annual growth when Christ was upon earth. Another treasured redwood described by Butts, long since converted to lumber, was the Holbrook Camp ground tree. Over 22 feet diameter, it was used as a 2-story residence with rooms for over 12 feet in diameter. Once the Russian River had been logged, Guerneville and its surroundings were marked as a destination for pleasure seekers from San Francisco. We're putting in a railroad which was built in 1871 to transport lumber from the sawmills of the Bay Area. The last stop in the route north was Cazadero, a hunting resort for sportsmen. So again, 1871, I'm going to show that date. That's when the Bohemian Grove was began. This 1871, this is when Washington, D.C. was founded, created the corporation, February 21st, 1871. Then we had the 16th Amendment. So 1871 is a huge date all the way around. So the last stop in the north was Cazadero, a hunting resort. Just before that, the train passed through the Elm Grove site of the early tourist hotel named after a passage in the Bible. So here are the Christians, here's the Catholics, here's the Jesuits, here's the Dominican friars already having their names on their places, taking it over, dominating. And they, Moses and his followers fleeing Egypt, came to Elohim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. There were palm trees already up in Northern California, and they camped there by the waters. So here you have a town called Elm Grove, and here you're saying that Moses and his followers fleeing Egypt came to Elm Grove. No. As I've said before, what was America before it was South America, North America, and Central America? It was the ancient lands of which Egypt was derived on, Jerusalem was derived on, Lebanon was derived from, all from the America. All right, let's go back to some pictures for a minute. I'll come back. Well, here, let's just finish here. So the engraved title, The Healed and Gurn Manufacturers, was published in 1877, includes a big stump in the foreground, 12 feet in diameter. Show you a pic in a minute. So just again, among the early tourist visitors, the Russian were members of Bohemian Grove, the Illuminati, an exclusive men's club founded in San Francisco in 1872. And by 1871, they already got railroads going up there. In 1887, the club leased the Elm Grove from the owner of a Cazadero and held summer encampments among the redwood trees. Members of the Bohemian Club who took part in the festivities included wealthy businessmen, powerful politicians, and successful artists, musicians, and writers. Among them was Jack London. An amphitheater and the giant redwoods provided entertainment. Over the years, the Bohemian Club increased in size of its forest holding the Russian River to 2,700 acres. The forest and its subsequent growth was left unlogged until 1984. Since then, commercial logging has continually increased until the current situation where the semi-intact redwood forest is suffering an aggressive assault on its biodiversity. John Hooper pleads for recognition of ecological significance of Bohemian Grove as a rare opportunity to preserve and restore the old growth forest as the last unprotected forest remnant in San Francisco. The urgent need to save Bohemian Grove is palatable. And here's the mammoth stump right here. So let me take a picture. Let's get into how these pictures of the massive, this 370 feet tall, here 79 feet. And look at how massive the giant sequoias are, the oldest trees in the world, biggest trees in the world. This is why California got over from the ancient brown people after they slaughtered and killed them all. Look at the size of these stumps. All right, so let's say this person he looks fairly tall. So let's just say 6 feet. So look at how big it is. And then this saw, again, these are two saws put together. They might be a thing. It was one. And look at, again, how clean this cut is. And you're going to tell me these guys stood on springboards and they used this elongated saw with this little tiny little bit in the middle, and they cut this massive tree down in such perfection on such a straight line, standing on springboards, pull, push, pull, push. 20 men, 5 days felled the trees. And look at the stacked wood in the background. And again, the clear-cut forest. And again, how did they get the bark off the trees? And again, this is two saws. And then look here in the middle. You think that thing's fragile? And as soon as you start cutting again into the tree, it's going to drop on the saw. How are you going to get the saw out of there? Who sharpens the saws? Where did you get the steel? Do you think every day they got to sharpen these blades that they wear out? Push, pull, push, pull. Doesn't make any sense, any common sense at all. And again, showing you this is the World's Fair's the Mammoth Forest in 1894. And again, they got the saw from here to here. Yet the saw isn't even big enough to cut the tree. The guys aren't even wide enough to pull the saw back and forth to cut the tree. And I'll get into how they ship these trees all around for exhibition to show, hey, we're dominating. This is an interesting picture here of these crosscuts. And again, so they take the saw, okay, the saw blades, all right, these cross saws they're called, and then they have to cross saw all these sections. Then they have to, first they have to debark all these sections. And then they have to cut them all like length, and then they put them on these, on trains. Here the guys are fixing some type of grappling system to lift it up using cables. And again, the propaganda, standing on these trees with these perfect cuts. How did they cut at this angle? Yeah, I can see you could get an argument, oh, you could cross saw standing on these springboards here, but what did these top angle cuts in such perfection? Anyone tell me? Oh yeah, we're using axes to cut. All right, and then here's how they're saying they debark. They take these forks and they literally just carve it out, carve it out, carve it out. And again, how do they roll them over to do the other side? And again, look at the denuded forest in the background. Everywhere you see it, denuded forest. Why don't any of these trees have limbs on them? There was some type of event that took all the limbs of the branches off these trees. You wouldn't delimb these little trees if you weren't going to use them. Why did they do that? And then look at all the trash. Look at all the mess. And when the rains come, what happens to all this slough? Because it's not protected by the forest anymore. It's going to run over the tracks, and you're going to have to replace the tracks again, over and over and over again. Yet they were able to run tracks through giant redwoods in the late 1800s. And again, look at these perfect cuts. Oh, and here we see that, here's the bark on the ground and everything. But again, where's the stumps? How did they lift these up? How did they get them out with horse and buggy and oxens and stuff? We took them to the coast. Over and over again, we see the same kind of propaganda. These massive, massive trees. This is the stump one we were talking about here. Oh, we can make a nice little bench. We'll kill the tree and make a nice little bench. And then here are the massive stumps from all up and down the west coast of the rape of the redwoods, the rape of the ancient sequoias. As soon as the white man got here, raped. Oh, we're going to drive through. How cool is that? And again, here you see the springboards that were set way up high to cut these trees and fell them. Yet again, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, pull, push, pull, push. These guys are standing here, and they got to stand on outside and be able to pull, push. And again, how did they make that top crosscut? They never show you. And this tree was so big that they sent it in 1893 to the Chicago World's Fair for exhibition. And we'll get into that in a minute. This was sent to the San Francisco and to the Chicago World Fair. We'll get into that in a minute. And then here's the General Noble tree in 1895 was sent to Washington, D.C. Hey, look at the big tree we got. We're going to send it to Washington, D.C. to show how we raped the land and how good we took about it. All right. So hopefully I put a question in your mind that just using a cross saw or axes and picks couldn't have done what they did. So, okay, it had to be a saw. Yet the first power saw wasn't built in the 1870s when a steam tree feller was designed. It was the first gasoline-powered chainsaw tested in 1905 in Eureka. So here you see the first chainsaw was not until 1905. And by the way, they didn't have gasoline on the West Coast until, 1905. These early experiments were followed by air and electric powered models. Moderately successive drag reciprocating saws were used to cut fallen logs to length and to make short bolts for shingles. All these experimental models proved to be too cumbersome, too heavy, and too undependable. Then in 1927, built a portable gasoline-powered chainsaw. So we see the chainsaws replaced the crosscut and buck saws for felling trees, as well as remaining axe work. The chainsaw also made new felling techniques possible. In the big timber country, the humble undercut was used. After initial horizontal cut of the tree trunk, a second angle was sawed to the horizontal cut, then the wedge of the wood between the two cuts was removed from the stump. So look at that. The wedge was moved from the stump. All right, so here, going back to this picture here. Oops. Let me get a cross-section cut here. All right, right here. Here's the wedge they're talking about. Well, how'd they get the wedge out? So you cut here, and then you got to pull the wedge out. How did they get the wedge out after they had done the cross-cut? So I get another picture here. Yeah, here. All right, so you cut here. Let's assume they were able to do a cross saw and they were able to not have to stand on here, and magically they were able to cut it this way. And then how did they get the big chunk out? How did they remove it? Pick an axe, and cut it out, and then remove it, and then debark it, and then cut it up, and then put it on oxen, and then send it to the coast. That's the official narrative history story. So many commercial big tree trophy images were taken on the prostrate giant sequoia called Big Tree, which had a circumference of 78 feet. Similar were published. The Big Tree was located in Fresno Grove in Madera County. When discovered by settlers in 1857, the grove was said to contain 600 giant sequoias. Most were destroyed between 1888 and 1892 by the Madera Flume and Trading Company and the Madera Sugar Pine Company. One of the cross sections of the Big Tree was used to illustrate its life of nearly 20 centuries, 2,000 years. The display points of the events of the time scale of tree rings, such as jailing of Apostle Paul in 58 AD when the tree had just sprouted. All All right, so here's where they're doing the whole, hey, let's show you what we're doing. This is from the 50-foot stump that remained after the fall of the General Noble. A 30-foot section of the base was divided into 14 pieces and prepared to be sent to Chicago for display. The interior wood was removed from the tree, except a small thickness of the bark was reconstructed. A photo by Curtis Records. This image includes a game trophy, a black bear displayed by a hunter standing at its head with his rifle in hand. Curtis provided 18 images which documented the annihilation and conversion of the General Noble and proved the authenticity of the monster tree. The images were exhibited on the walls of 2 rooms, one above the other, that had been built into the reconstructed trunk and were connected by the inner staircase. So this is saying that they took this to the East Coast for the World's Exhibition. And again, look at this picture here. And what do you see? Okay, so the tree's been hollowed out. Here's the guy standing on their springboards. But look in the foreground. How did they cut the lumber like that? How do they cut out the middle of the tree? How do they make these perfect cuts? They have a sawmill sitting right next to them? You tell me. But it's sitting there right at the base of the tree like, hey, we just used pick and axe and a cross saw, and we made these perfect cuts. Right. So the forestry building at the 1893 World's Exhibition in Chicago, with its commodified remains of big trees, embodied national aspirations that were synonymous with commercial exploitation. Some 40 billion cubic feet of American forest were being annually cut down and perverted into lumber at the turn of the century, supporting a powerful industry that symbolized the end of the Western frontier and the native people. Following its display in Chicago, the General Noble trunk was shipped to Washington, D.C., where it stood on the mall near the Agriculture Department building for 3 decades. The success of the Chicago's 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition prompted the undertaking of the World's Fair in San Francisco the following year, called the California Midwinter International Exposition. 2 massive tree trunks from California displayed in Chicago, one from the General Noble tree and the other a 40-foot fake, a hollow structure covered with panels of redwood bark. San Francisco, a big tree display was undertaken, and a sacrificial sequoia in the Mammoth Grove in Calaveras County was selected. It was nearly 3,000 years old and measured 99 feet in circumference and 312 feet in height. Tabor's 40 folio-sized images when captions were displayed along the big tree sections to provide its authenticity. And again, to give, how they did this, the storyline, 1789, the American felling axe evolved to meet the settlers' needs, occupiers. The unique axe was a straight-handled and single-bitted one blade, which gave great balance and more power to the stroke. Heavy wedged blade was both durable and easily extracted from the wood. Curved blades handles became the standard in the 19th century. So again, they had to bring all these picks, these axes of steel, the sharpeners, all around by boat, including the trains, which we'll get into in a minute. Sometime around 1850, loggers began using a double-bitted axe. The new invention proved to be very popular. The axe had the advantage of having 2 cutting edges, yet still possessed the balance and durability of a single-bitted. White American trash settlers modified European cutting and chopping techniques. Instead of making V-shaped cuts, this method gave the feller great control of the direction of the tree. In the 1870s, cross-cut saws were adapted to felling trees. So in 1870, remember I showed you 1852, they were already harvesting the wood? They didn't have the cross-cut saws were adapted until 1870s. And those are those big, long saws I was just showing you. Cross-cut saws had long been used to cut logs and lengths once they were on the ground, but now, beginning in the 1870s, they were used in the horizontal position to cut the trees down. 2 cross-cut saw developments helped this major advance. The invention of raker teeth, which then coupled with cutting teeth and gullets, carried away the sawdust and the tree pitch or the sap that would often clog the saw blade. Tree pitch or sap, the pitch of the tree. When you cut it, it pitches down to where the cut is and pinches your blade. You can't get it out. Or the sap, which makes it, these trees are full of sap. So your blades have to be taken and cleaned all the time. The invention resulted in a saw that could cut green standing trees without binding the blade. The other invention was the adoption of the tempered steel blade, which was stronger than the previous saws and remained sharp for hours of use. So previously it didn't stay sharp for hours of use. Again, 1870s, but they're still felling trees in the 1850s and 1860s. The other invention was the adoption of the tempered steel blade. The use of crosscut saws, especially the two-man saws, spread rapidly and became the industry standard for years. So the two-man saw didn't begin until the 1870s. By the turn of the 20th century, new saw designs were created, yada, yada. The buck saw was lighter, but not suitable for long trees. The springboard was introduced in the far west and the cypress logging in the south. These springboards served as platforms, as I showed you. During this period, logging operations were along the edges of streams and rivers, making the transportation logs downstream to the mill a relatively easy task for river log drives. So check this out. So once they got the logs to the Mendocino coast, Sonoma coast, Humboldt coast, Oregon coast, Canada, British Columbia, they had to put them and get the lumber. There's a little house and this is a chute onto ships because the rocks were here and it was going to destroy the boats. Again, how does this boat sail out of here, right? How does it protect itself? And then they'd send the lumber, which had to be cut and milled, down onto these schooners, two-masted schooners, and then shipped down to San Francisco. And then look at the lumber mills. Look at how much lumber they produce. Look at this guy. All perfectly cut, all wedged. How did they lift those? How did they put them all up there in the 1870s? And I'm going to show you these chutes. These are amazing. This is in Mendocino coast. They had these, again, how did they put these into the water? How did they anchor these standards down into the rock? Who did that? They had to bring the lumber out to here. They had to set it up and erect it somehow and put it at these angles, which created these ramps so they could load it onto the ships. Are you kidding me? Here it is. Here's all the lumber that's already been milled, ready to be loaded onto the boats that had to be set out to sea. Otherwise, they're going to run aground on the rocks. It was so critical. This is how elaborate. After they had the oxen pulling them out of the forest down to the mills and then milled and then put on these stanchions that were set out to sea and then loaded onto the two masted schooners to be shipped out. Westport, California. Okay, so here's the mills. This is Big River Mill. And here you can see the train tracks. You see these stovepipes. Look at how tall these are. I don't know what that standard is there, but here they had to get it all the way out to the water in order to ship it out after they harvested the lumber and made it into pliable wood so they could ship it. This is Rockport, California. Just a quick sidebar here again, the communication system. 1846, the first newspaper was established. 48 found gold. 49, in 1949, California Pacific Mail Steamship. Why did they have a Pacific Mail Steamship in 1849? And then Polk confirms gold in California, but they didn't have the telegraph system until 1861. The Pony Express only lasted 2 years, 1860 to 1871. The world's first long-distance telephone wasn't ready until 1871. It wasn't used till 1915 in San Francisco, talking to the president at the San Francisco exhibition, the Pan-Pacific exhibition in San Francisco. So how did they communicate? How did they order all their stuff? How did they get it all out to the West Coast when they needed to make the rails? They needed to get the, all the equipment out there to make the axes and sharpen them and all this stuff. The Intercontinental Railroad was connected in 1869, as I said. All right, here's another big question. How did they ship the trains? Well, first, let me get back to this. All right, so talking about how they got the logs down to the coast to get them onto the boats to ship them down to San Francisco after they had been milled. The logging operations often took edges of streams and rivers, making transportation of logs downstream to the mill an easy task. As harvesting proceeded, logging operations moved farther and farther away from the river's edge, creating a problem how to move the logs. Loggers responded by cutting smaller length of logs in the case of redwoods and trees by riving the logs lengthwise. So here they're splitting the logs lengthwise. How do you split a log lengthwise? Well, you take an axe and you stand on each side, you take an axe and you hit between your legs over and over again. And then you have to somehow get all the way down to the bottom of the log. And then when it's on the ground, how's that axe going to work and split it when it's on the ground? Well, maybe you can take one of those augers and pry it apart. I don't know, but it's not going to be a clean cut. So yarding and skidding the logs also changed over decades. The most difficult aspect was moving logs from where they had been felled to a place where they could be transported to the mill. Log moving technology progressed quickly through human effort applied through brute force and primitive tools to oxen and horses. So mechanization came and the high-wheeled logging I showed you earlier were suspended under an arch that connected a set of large wooden wheels. Now, there were steel wheels. High wheels, as they were called, were pulled by horse or oxen. Beginning in 1880s, railroads with special geared locomotives were used to transport the logs from the forest to the mill. 3 well-known gear-driven locomotives were manufactured by Shea, Climax, and Heisler. Many of the first Forest Service timber sales were railroad operations. A great improvement on the hauling logs to transport sites was the invention of the stationary steam-powered donkey engines I was talking about earlier. This process was referred to as ground-led logging. Again, the first power saws in the 1870s, again until 1985. I'm sorry, 1905 was when the first chainsaws was tested in Eureka. So I'll include this in the show notes. This is a site called cathedralgrove.eu. And it's got some great information I've been getting from here. Some of the information, here's the guy showing killing the bear, which is sent to the east, showing, hey, we're hunting, we're killing, hey, we're doing everything, we're taking down the animals, we're taking down the trees, aren't we cool, aren't we great, yada, 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 yada. And they took down, went over the mammoth tree already, all these massive trees, 3,000 years old before the time of Christ, just board feet, nothing but board feet. Here is the mother of the forest, another famous sequoia, Mammoth Tree Grove in California County. I think I covered this a little bit, but here I want to show you the engraving reprinted on the heart of the Sierras in 1888. The tree measured 321 feet, 84 feet in circumference without the bark. The text reads, quote, now, alas, the noble mother of the forest, dismantled of her once proud beauty, still stands boldly out, a reproving yet magnificent ruin. Even the elements seem to have sympathized with her in the unmerited disgrace brought to her by the axe. The axe? As the snows and storms of recent winters have kept hastening her dismemberment, the sooner to cover up the wrong. The mother of the forest, 305 feet high, 63 feet in circumference. It shows the 120-foot scaffold used in 1854 to strip the bark from the trunk. All right, what kind of scaffolding is that? Does that look like wood or does that look like metal? The bark was sent to the sea from San Francisco to New York and London for the purpose of profit from this display, as curiously and as proof to the disbelieving public of the existence of such trees. Hey, we destroyed the forest. Look what we did. Hey, come on, let's celebrate it. And again, Calaveras County, big trees of Fresno. And then here, the Mark Twain tree. And again, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, Freemason, one of your first Freemasons to come to California. Freemasons in San Francisco by the Golden Gate, 1849. They're already here. When Mark Twain was cut down in 1891, the sequoia, 1,341 years old, measured 331 feet and 90 feet high, 90 feet in circumference. Today, a stump is all that remains of the once thriving tree that might have survived another 1,000 years or more. The ancient tree relic is located in the Big Stump Grove, which is now Kings Canyon National Park in Fresno. And among the curiosities, lumbering days, including a 150-year-old pile of sawdust, or maybe her tears. Some cross sections of the felled Mark Twain tree were cut for display purposes, and the rest of the tree was milled for grape stakes, fence posts, and shingles by the Kings River Lumber Company. Mark Twain had the misfortune of growing in an area where the high Sierra Nevada mountains called Millwood that was purchased by the lumber barons who took possession of 30,000 acres of sequoia forest in 1888. By 1905, the company had laid waste to some 8,000 giant sequoias, all over 2,000 years old. Because of the huge size and weight of Mark Twain, his killing by company loggers took 8 days. An engraving shows 2 men after their labor on the stump, just before the tree came crashing down. The bed of branches built to prevent its breakage on impact is seen below the trees. So they actually had to cut more trees to break the impacts, as the trees would blow apart once they hit the ground. The Mark Twain tree was magnificent. One of the most perfect trees in the grove was selected to provide a cross-section of display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. The curator marked its annual rings, selected events of human history. Its birth, 550 AD, made Mark Twain a contemporary of Justinian, Emperor of the Roman Empire. Quote, with these historic contrasts before us, we can begin to picture in our imagination the span of life that has been enjoyed by this hardy forest, Methuselah. So you can see the cross-section of the Mark Twain tree was sent to London. Why? Why was this so important? And how did they get them on ships? And why did they send them all the way to London? How did they communicate? 1869 is when the Transcontinental Railroad and everything. So this was the cathedral of nature they're destroying. They're destroying the forest, as I've showed you over and over. And then here it's displayed, the California noble tree displayed at the California's World Fair in 1894. Again, the 1849s, the gold rush, 1850 statehood. By 1894, they're putting on exhibitions, which is now Golden Gate Field, and they're putting on these massive logs to show their domination of nature. We will dominate nature. And again, these saws aren't even big enough to go through. All right, so one more point here. And were you aware, or did you know, I didn't, that growing up in the Bay Area as I did, that Oakland area, Berkeley, Oakland, that area across the San Francisco Bay, was once a coastal redwood giant forest. Who knew? Old Survivor, has a unique shaggy appearance. Despite its name, which dates to 1549 to 1554, was actually young for the old growth coastal redwoods, many of which lived between 12 to 1800 years or more. And then they're saying, oh, the Spanish-Portuguese explorer Juan Cabrillo led the expedition to explore the coast, which is now California. From 1845 to 1860, logging on the coast in the area of valuable timber wiped out much of the dense coastal redwoods that once populated the Oakland hills of the East Bay. Who knew it? A second wave of logging following the 1906 San Francisco earthquake further contributed to the forest destruction, leaving only a few scattered pockets of old-growth redwoods left in the entirety of the East Bay. So they say the tree was rediscovered in 1969. Rediscovered? 1969? Are you kidding me? 300-foot tree and you're rediscovering it in 1969? Wiki. Old Survivor was designated a City of Oakland historic landmark in 1980. By 2018, the movie Old Survivor was released, celebrating the tree. Yay! There's one left. So this is from baynature.org, Old Giants, the Last Days of the Oakland Redwoods. Again, I had no idea until I started researching this, that the Bay Area had massive old growth redwoods and sequoias. In the hills east of Oakland, a pocket of ancient and enormous redwoods thrived just where the ocean fog reached and rested in a small band spanning the bridge from present-day Redwood and Leona Parks east of Moraga, roughly 5 square miles of dense old-growth forest. Because redwoods crowns sprout from the stumps and the roots of the fallen ancestors, the age of such a forest is almost inconceivable. While a 32-foot broad, 300-foot tall tree might represent a millennium of vertical growth, the genetics and rootstock below might span many thousands, if not millions, of years. But it took little more than 15 years from 1845. Hey, they're already here in 1845 logging, and the 1849 gold rush didn't start, and 1846 Mexican War started, and they're already here in 1845 logging, white guys? Come on. Come on. So for crews of loggers to level the entire forest, even many of the stumps were dug out and cut into cords of firewood or shingles, preventing the next generation from crown sprouting around its old grandmother. Only one original tree remains today, a twisted runt of an old-growth redwood 93 feet tall, growing miraculously out of a rock on a cliff face near Merritt College, and probably too difficult to reach or to catch as it fell for the loggers to bother. And look at the destruction of the environment. Again, the oxen, they have to feed, they have to shelter, they have to harness, they have to yoke, then they have to haul, they have to, look at these logs. Look at how long these logs are, folks. They have to cut all the ravines, take down all the trees, and get them all down and clear it all out so they can put the boards down here and level it all with dirt and gravel and whatnot. Where'd they get the gravel? To pull all these logs by these oxen? That's the story. So long before they were logged, the redwoods along the ridge were well known by sailors. Two giants called the navigation trees stood at the edge of the grove, silhouetted stark contrast against the horizon, and were first recorded by British Navy Captain Frederick William Beechley in 1826. He discovered that in order to avoid colliding with the Blossom Rock, an underwater island visible only at low tide and safely land in San Francisco Harbor, he must line up at the tip of Yerba Buena Island with two at the top of the hills, too conspicuous to be ignored. When the navigation trees were logged after 1855, the Army blew up Blossom Rock in order to avoid shipwrecks. Oakland's enormous redwoods were not easy trees to fell due to their size, but also their location on steep and roadless canyons. A handful were cut here and there before 1850, mainly by two French carpenters in the early 1840s who hand milled the wood and transported down the hills on small boats that navigated the streams. Where'd they get the boats? How'd they get the people to hire? There was no one in San Francisco back then. There was a few hundred people before the gold rush, they'd say. There was nobody there. But most of the redwoods were quiet, especially after 1842 when John Sutter began milling wood in the Sierras at Fort Ross. The lumber port of San Antonio, which was shipping many tons of redwood lumber up and down the bay each day by early 1850s, shipping lumber up and down the bay. I thought everybody came out for the gold rush, but here they're shipping lumber. Soon became the port of Oakland, and the city of Oakland grew quickly around it. Virtually all east-west roads through Oakland were planned in relation to the logging camps in the hills and were used by mule and ox teams to drag wood down out of the forest to the port. The old-growth redwoods became the new towns of the East Bay and much of the city of San Francisco. So I haven't done any research in this yet, but are they saying that the old-growth redwoods were in San Francisco as well? All in all, with the trees themselves must have felt like no more than a single inhalation of time. Really, it was a savage and devastating free-for-all, and each mill operator and his men racing all competitors for access to these virgin stands of trees. In no time, there were 10 sawmills, 9 of them steam-powered, 1 powered by water. According to the diaries of Joseph Lamson, owner of the lodging house and grocery store deep in the Redwoods from 1853 to 1855. So 1853, 1855, he's got a lodging house, he's got a liquor store, he's got a grocery store. The mill workers were a rowdy, rough-dealing, hard-drinking lot, often called the Redwood Boys or the Redwood Rangers, like some band of terrible and legendary outlaws. By 1854, the biggest trees were gone. By 1854, the biggest trees were gone. 49er Gold Rush, 50 statehood, people coming by boat, Transcontinental Railroad isn't in place yet, horse and buggy. 1860, all the mills had closed down. Wait, you just set up the mills, and by 1860, all the mills had closed down because they harvested all the trees with horse and buggy and putting on these little sloops and 2-schooner ships? The hills were a ragged quilt of stumps. The delicate root system of the shy understory plants, such as redwood sorrel and trillium, were so damaged by the ravages of the oxen teams and the deep furrows made by the trees that they dragged that even today, few sorrel or wake robin communities have returned. All the redwoods now protected within the Redwood Regional, Sibley, Anthony Chabot, Leona Canyon, and Joaquin Miller parks are spry young, third-growth generation, tiny in comparison to their ancestors, and lonesome. No longer do giant California condors in their bows, nor do grizzly bears come paddling down through the orange spice duff in the dead of night to steal oxen from the pens of loggers. In the silence of the redwood forest, that is still palatable if you venture up the side canyons from any trail, has lost something of its pulse. It will take thousands of years for them to become ancient giants again with the span of stars in their embered bark. And in 10 years, they destroyed it all. The white man, the Euro white man, for profit, the redwoods, the rivers, nature's resources are nothing but board feet, bottled water for Nestle. We do not rever nature. And that is another reason the karma of what's going on today is coming back at us, folks. This is the karma of our ancestors, of what we did to nature and what we did to the native brown people, the hundreds of tribes that were in California that were slaughtered and massacred that I covered in the part 10. And just to drive it all home, and then I'll probably end it here, and then the next one I'm going to get into is about the trains and how they got them here. So between 1848 and 51, San Francisco population jumped from 800 to 35,000 inhabitants. Right. By 1860, California had 20 1860. So 1849 gold rush, 1850, they all start coming, and then all they get on the ships because there's no trains, and they got to go all around the Cape. Again, the railroad wasn't across the Panama Canal until the 1854-55. So again, they had to sail all the way around South America, all the way to the East Coast. But if they sailed, as I'll get into in the next video, they had to sail out towards Africa to catch the winds, the Cape winds, to get around to South America. And it took 6 to 8 months each way. And all of a sudden, you're telling me 35,000 people were here? The value of manufacturing output exceeded that of gold production by $20 million. In 1865, San Francisco ranked among the top 10 American cities in terms of capital invested and in the value of manufacturing output. In 1866, the city contained 13 iron foundries and 30 machine shops. By 1866, right. Technologies associated with flumes, dams, and high-pressure accumulators became highly advanced between 1870 and 1890. As early as 1879, hydraulic technology was applied to the generation of electricity, at first for mine lighting applications. By 1890, the environmental degradation caused by hydraulic mining became so severe that legislation was passed to curtail this. I'm going to cover this in a future video. It was the first environmental law ever passed in the United States because hydraulic mining was sending massive amounts of water into the Sacramento River all the way to the San Francisco Bay from the Sierras that pushed the coastlines out so hundreds of feet because of the silt and the destruction. Ships couldn't even sail in the Sacramento River anymore because of the destruction caused by hydraulic mining. Gold mining created a generation of men who knew how to build tunnels, canals, and flumes. No, they were the poor people coming for the gold, weren't they? How to lay pipe and rugged terrain, how to handle water, and where to find it. This might aid the electrical engineers when they began to build water-powered electric plants. So in 1844, Yerba Buena contained only a dozen houses, and one permanent population did not exceed 50 persons. And remember, they're telling you across the bay in the 1840s, they were already cutting down the trees and putting them on ships and everything, and there's only a dozen houses in San Francisco. 1846, the population numbered up to 200, and buildings of all kinds increased to nearly 50. On the 1st April of the following year, it contained 79 buildings, 22 shanties, 31 frame houses. About this time, the permanent population increased to 500 in 1848. The time when the rush to the diggings commenced, the town contained nearly 200 buildings. Again, 35 finished dwellings, 10 unfurnished houses. So they had to have carpenters to build this. They had to put the roads in. They had to excavate. They had to engineer. But wasn't everybody running up for the gold rush? I don't get it. As 1847, the population was a little more than 300. In the 7th of the month, the first number of the California Star appeared. The paper was published by Samuel Brannan and edited by D.P. Jones, Samuel Brannan, Freemason. It was a small sheet, 4 pages. So in 1847, this guy's already got a newspaper going on for just a few hundred people in San Francisco because they need to know. The Californian was also a weekly paper and much inferior type. So they had 2 newspapers. This was 1846, and they got 1847. They already got 2 newspapers for a few hundred people. Does that make any sense to anyone? So the Indians, the Sandwich Islanders, and Negroes, who formed nearly 1/5 of the population, were employed as servants and porters, no slaves. Many of the Sandwich Islanders, as Hawaii, were engaged in navigating the bay and were very expert boatmen. Get this. So the build out of San Francisco, the elite California Academy of Sciences, was established in 1853. They're establishing the Academy of Sciences in 1853 to 300 members by 1884. The Mechanics Institute of San Francisco was established in 1855 and had 1,919 members and a library of almost 35,000 books by 1884. In 1884, civil, mechanical, and hydraulical engineers formed the Technical Society of the Pacific Coast with 126 charter members, which existed until 1914. By 1880, the population of San Francisco had mushroomed to almost over 250,000 people, and the city contained almost 3,000 manufacturing plants by 1880. Again, the railroad, 1869, cross-country, one way. Coal and wood were not resources in abundant supply, so the cities developed dependence on other energy sources such as gas and hydroelectric power. And in 1901, they had the electric trains. Oh, and by the way, there were fires. So this was a fire in 1851 in San Francisco. So what did they say? They had 200 buildings, and then there's a fire in 1851 in San Francisco. Oh, and they had another fire, the Great Fire of 1849 in San Francisco. And then we'll get into later as they brought the Chinese out. And there's a whole story about the enslavement of the Chinese to make them, again, pick an axe to build the Transcontinental Railroad, which we'll get into a future video. And thanks for staying with me almost 90 minutes here. But I'll get into the next about the railroads, how they got the railroads here. And look at all these railroads that were already put in place in the 1880s, 1885, 1853, 1863, 1898. And I'll get into this whole how they got the railroads shipped from the East Coast, ordered, shipped, and sent 6 to 8 months each way. And then all these ships in the harbor were all scuttled because everybody went up for the gold rush, and they were all scuttled. Well, who would send another ship? Who would build another ship and send it if they knew it wasn't going to return? And then the other big question is, how did they transport the trains? This is the only picture I could find anywhere of a train being put on a ship. 1912 this was from. So how did they get all the trains to the West Coast? As I showed you earlier, 1852, they already had the first railroad. And again, how did they communicate? Again, history is a lie. We need revisionist history. We need to start new education systems. We need to re-educate, relearn, unlearn, and teach to our children the new her story about nature and reverence for all fecundity of life, because we lost it all by the you're a white man for profit and capitalism. Capitalizing capitalists. It all has to come down, folks. We can't keep destroying nature. There's another reason we got to go away, is because nature will not let us be here if we keep destroying her. We depend on nature for life, yet we give no reverence. We give her no quarter. All right, thanks for listening, friends and family and loved ones. Next video is going to be about how these trains all got on ships and yada, yada, all the BS about that. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And I'd love to hear any of your comments in the show notes. Thank you.
Imagine you can produce the power you need where you consume it. No fossil fuels, no heat, no combustion. Power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. A zero-grid solution powered by the Earth Engine.
We're at SRI, about to enter the motor room. Here we go. Here we are. There it is. Spinning away.
Your electrical demand is probably around 7 to 8 kilowatt max, maybe a little bit more than that. So one of these will do between 4 and 5 average homes.
Wow.
Now, shutting down and what startup? I mean, as far as
This never shuts off.
never, you don't ever have to shut it off.
If there's a shutdown, it means there was an issue.
Yeah.
It runs all the time. Now, when the range is not on, then you're just storing all the energy. It's quite a bit.
You don't have to add any power to it. It just has its battery.
It has a parasitic load that comes off from a 700 watt battery. So this takes between 400 and 600 watts of parasitic load.
Okay.
And then pumps out the balance. There's no friction. There's no belts, drives, gears,
No brushes. Like, yeah, it's brushless. It's how long does that battery last? Typically,
It'll give you like 15 starts over. We guarantee it for 10 years or 15,000
The
cycles.
initial juices
Okay.
to start that.
Yeah.
So is all of this room powered by this now?
Correct.
There you have it. This little room here. Really know where this has been. Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Hey, folks, and welcome to one of my most important and most exciting video documentaries I have ever done. This is super exciting stuff, and it's just getting started. It's an embryonic stage. Not only are we learning about biomagnetic healing in order to help people and ourselves with issues and the toxicity in our world today, having answers that can actually take down big pharma and eliminate needs for hospitals and whatnot using biomagnetic healing, as we've been talking about and bringing to you over the past year or so. This induction earth engine at Induction Energy Company, they're out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Scottsdale, Arizona. And that video clip you just saw was an actual working machine that's can power 4 to 5 homes from that one standalone magnetic propulsion machine. Powering humanity using magnetic propulsion, the world's most efficient energy source. Wahoo! Earth engine is the world's first and only power source propelled by asymmetrical magnetic propulsion. It can generate electricity, operate liquid pumps, air compressors, and other mechanical devices 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and it's fully independent of the power grid and offers significant cost savings over other technologies. Let me read that again. It is fully independent of the power grid that exists and offers significant cost savings. The Earth engine creates constant, reliable, and renewable energy. And look at the output on this thing. The Induction Energy has developed and manufactures and installing, I believe this is their 3.0 model, a 7.5 to 25 kilowatt engines capable of driving up to 4,000 pounds of inertia power and delivering in excess of 25 kilowatts of energy. That's huge. And these aren't just some fly-by-night guys that have put together Induction Energy Company. These are guys that have serious business, CEO, corporate director, president, wide variety of world companies. And the chief engineer, Dennis Danzig, has had a 33-year career in mechanical engineering with over 500 products. And also Vince Melly. These are guys that have been doing this and putting this together and discovering the ancient energy secrets. And also, the Wall Street Journal has actually picked up the story on Mr. Danzig. One man's the future of everything, one man's unlikely quest to power the world with magnets. Mr. Danzig has invented a whirligig that calls for the suspension of disbelief and the laws of physics. If it works as advertised, it would rank with the harnessing of steam, electricity, and the atom. How exciting is this? And so I'm going to show you the Earth engine, and here it is, their third prototype. I think they call it the 30 model. And this is the device that was installed in the Las Vegas shooting range recently. I believe it was last year. And as I said, this device alone with a battery attached to it can power 4 to 5 homes from this one standalone machine device. And here's Mr. Danzig explaining the device and how it works. Very exciting. Pretty cool, right?
This is Model 30. This is a third in a line of commercial earth engines that were produced here at the National Training Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm going to take a few minutes to show you some of the features of Model 30. Model 30 uses approximately 4,000 pounds of mass, 2,000 pounds in each flywheel. These particular flywheels have their magnetic fields being generated here at the flywheel level. And then the actual accelerated magnetic field is here between the space between this segregated wall and the actual flywheel. And as you can see, there's absolutely no contact between the engine at any point between its shafts, any other belts, pulleys, motors, or chains. The pulse rate is a very important discovery here, and that the difference between 24 is approximately 80 pulses per minute. This engine, Model 30, has a pulse rate up to in excess of 5,000 pulses a minute, meaning that we can drive it at much, much higher speeds. This also has an intercept speed, so we get double the power that we were because they're counter-rotating. It also helps control gyroscopic precession, which is typically generated from a spinning mass. Now we'll go around the backside and I'll explain how the alternator is driven on an earth engine. And these are very unique because they are zero contact alternator devices that produce up to 600 volts, both AC and DC voltage. And that voltage can be converted to household current, 120 volt single phase, as they say, or 240 volt single phase, or 480 volt three phase. And I'll take just a minute to show you how it operates. This alternator is a 10 kilowatt head that operates at a very low speed. It'll produce energy literally only at a couple of RPM, all the way up to about 1,000 RPM. And you can hear the engine winding up now. The Z drive that's on the end of this alternator picks up the magnetic flow, transfers that changes it to mechanical energy, and drives these mass plates, which in turn drive the alternator and allow it to take a little bit of a shock load as people plug in or turn on a hairdryer or whatever you might be running on an earth engine. I'm going to go ahead and pull it back. I'm going to eject the Z drive from the Z drive plate so that you can see that it is not connected in any way to the earth engine itself. There we've ejected the alternator completely. You can see it slowing down, and you can see the Z drive winding down because no more magnetic pressure is available to it at this point. I'm going to let it come to a complete stop, and then we'll slowly reinsert it so you can understand how we're converting magnetic energy into mechanical energy. So I'm just now getting it to the edge of the field, and as you can see, it's only about an inch inserted. It's already transmitting that energy by a magnetic pressure through the Z drive, through the transmission to the alternator. And now you can hear the Z drive actually creating torque into the transmission and transmitting that mechanical energy into the alternator and producing electrical current. And as you'll notice, there's absolutely no contact between the Z drive head itself and the Z drive plates.
So here's the mechanical apparatus he was talking about, the generator that takes it from magnetic energy and actually generates it into electricity to power homes or your businesses through this device.
It would appear it was built upside down.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, no, and this is so simple. I mean, what this does, there are 4 poles to this. 1, 2, 3, 4. One of these poles turns this to generate electricity.
right.
The other 3 create well, I'll use a simple term, create a current. Part of the current would go out here, and he would use that current. One of these poles runs this for electricity. The other 3 poles, basically what you're doing, you're separating mass from energy. The energy goes down and flows into the crank. The mass comes up through the chain over to its tripod. If you ever saw the tripod,
with the black box on top. It's not here, I noticed.
No, that motor most likely was the motor that was in the black box, and somebody robbed all the copper out of this stuff, and that had a fair amount of copper in it.
Well, that makes sense, because that's why it doesn't look like a motor.
Yeah.
I can tell those are magnets.
And there used to be copper coil here. There used to be 6 copper coils inside, and basically what you're doing, you're separating mass from energy. And I'm putting it simple. You're separating mass from energy. The mass gets sent up through the chain. If you notice, there's always a cable connecting to where it was working.
I did see that.
And what it is, what you're doing, you're raining. What it'd be like if you had a big chunk of wood on the ground and you said, lift that. Well, if that was a 1,000-pound chunk of wood, I can't lift that damn thing. Well, if you filled that around that with water, it would raise.
Right.
Okay, now using the same concept, water you can see. Well,
Energy is the same, but you can't see it.
See it. If you have tiny particles of mass, you can't see it.
I'm glad I woke up when I did.
And that's now. And the interesting thing is if you increase this. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever got shocked by a spark plug?
Yes, you bet.
Okay, well, that one of those magnets can give you a if you've got a spark, that's 6, 8, 10, 15,000 volts. If you look how many magnets plus what they're done, they're stepped.
it stepped up in a series of 3. You increase it 1, 2, 3 times, putting out. If you let this build, this just keeps building. 50,000, 100,000,
Really?
1,000, 500,000, million, 2, 3 million.
So it runs. It's infinite.
That's
Infinite free energy.
No, the problem is at some point the mechanical stress the materials can't hold the stress.
That stands to reason. That makes sense.
So that's, I mean, in the world, in my opinion, this is the most advanced machine that we've known in the last 20,000 years.
And they won't let us know it.
And
the guys out there telling me, I heard a little bit and I walked away. I'm like, I don't want to hear this. Yeah. This isn't real.
And
I know a lot about this guy. I've studied this extensively. Yeah. I know the gravity of what this is. No pun intended.
Yeah. And then even I'm looking at, the cuts. What you do with this all, it's like having a hot knife through butter. I mean, if you're running 2-3 million volts through a wire, what do you have? You have a hot knife through butter is what you have. And
recently, I have been attracted to the mystery that exists surrounding a place called the Coral Castle Museum. This site is located near Miami, Florida, USA. It is currently on the United States National Registry of Historic Places. This magnificent attraction was made by one man named Edward Leedskalnin. Ed was born in Latvia in 1887. His family came from a line of stonemasons, and his grandfather owned a cemetery tombstone monument establishment. Ed Leedskalnin emigrated to the United States around 1912. Here he learned how to rig big logs and worked in North American mines. Eventually, Ed would find his way to warmer, healthier weather in South Florida. He was known to be a smart man, and it is also said that he read a lot. Ed died in 1951 and left us an enduring megalithic site to behold physically here on Earth. But he also wrote 3 quaint, informative, semi-independent booklets that in most cases accurately describes 1, natural life, 2, some of his philosophy, and 3, more significantly, magnetic current. One large and very important thing he also left us was a unexplained magnetic iron flywheel assembly that has perplexed non-intellectual and intellectual communities alike. These include the Army Corps of Engineers, college professors, Coral Castle enthusiasts, and common mechanical type lay folks. Due to the permanence of this high-profile unknown apparatus, much controversy and hypothetical conjecture has shrouded its true purpose. In Ed's little book entitled Magnetic Current, he states that he had built 10 of these machines. He uses the word machines. After much research that includes reading, searching files, measuring actual values of factual remains, and conducting actual experimentation, etc., I have deduced the simple logical truths about Coral Castle. I have built one of Ed's machines to almost full completion. Most of this truth behind this machine was hidden due to many unforeseen occurrences and circumstances. Also, significant engineering knowledge and mechanical aptitude is required to actually describe the total process that Ed used, as well as the true purpose for the wheel and its 4 prominent clover leaves from an electrical point of view. Now here's how the machine works. A few batteries in the system reside inside the wheelhouse. Some of their current will turn the wheel, which is a giant variable speed rotary switch. There is a unit called a PMH that is actually the DC motor's field stator that magnetically pulses the wheel around in one direction. This in turn makes and breaks an electrical contact. This electrical contact is mounted to a follower that rides on the four-leaf clover cam lobes. This sends a signal from the same battery bank out to all the tripods on a third positive wire. To summarize the machine's totality, when that pulse of battery voltage is sent out on the grid's third wire, it picks up a small relay like that of a car horn. When that small relay pulls in, it makes a larger contact, sending bigger, more local battery current down the tripod and into the actuating solenoid. This solenoid pulls back an iron drive shaft or any other type of iron slug, and then a spring returns the actuator back when the rotary switch drops out again. There can be multiple actuators cutting at the same time to really accomplish a lot in a short time. Most manpower is spent moving the rocks, not cutting or sculpting them. Sweet.
So in closing, let's focus on the positive. Let's focus on what we can do, what we should do, what we need to do. Let's help support induction energy however we can. Let's get out our little mechanical engineers and help teach them how to create these devices as well, so they can be shared and they can be enjoyed and they can be used by others. It's pretty exciting when we see this kind of device that's being developed and being implemented, that it can be engineered and it can be made. Like I said, 4 to 5 homes that can be used as well. And let's support the man's unlikely. Let's make it a likely quest by giving the powers and the tools that we can to take down the machine, but also to provide a better way. And also, this is really cool. I found in the crop circles that are being made, that they have put in the crop circles the magnetic motor itself. They designed it into the crop circles. Crop circles are nothing more than putting lenses, templates over lasers, and then they just burn the crops out how they want them to. It's no aliens, no magical forces being put in. It's just technology being used. But in the technology being used, they showed us that the magnetic motor is the motor of the future. So let's use Howard Johnson. Let's use Mr. Lythwaite's. Let's use Mr. Danzig's work, and let's promote free energy for all, free independent microgrid energy off the grids of the power suppliers who do not look out for us, do not care about us, and do not want us to take back the power to ourselves. This is a huge game changer. Please share this with everybody. All right, Plain Truth out. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this as exciting as it is for me to discover and share with you all. Peace and love. Hey, friends, family, and loved ones. This is a video sent to me by Barry Gum in Australia. These are from pictures from the drones and artificial directed energy attacks that were done over Australia. And it's very well chronicled here how it was done. The machines are electromagnetic machines used as serial effect generator. They run cold plasma. That's what I've been saying for a long time. Uses the law of squares. Remember I said the embers, you could literally pick them up in your hands, the programmable embers in paradise. So what you're really seeing is the frequency of electricity energy showing as light. And you can go to this link I'll put in the show notes about the serial IGV inverse gravity vehicle. So this has been designed and this has been around for a very long time. And in the video below, you're going to see more evidence that I've accumulated about how we see it in the paradise. But this is a round one. This isn't the TR-3B. This is John Sears called the inverse gravity vehicle powered by the serial effect generator. That was in a 1960s BBC documentary. You could fly from London, New York in 15 minutes. BBC refused to replay the documentary. 1960, they'd have this technology. So on the left, you'll see the light at the right side of the vehicle, but the darkness at the left side, but darkness at the left side of the vehicle. Why? This is the effect of the generator's rollers spinning around the outside edges inside the craft that creates the electromagnetic field that encompasses everything, including the craft, like a force field. Machines flying at high speed, You can stop and read all this. I'm not going to highlight it, but you can stop and read what it's saying. It's a little difficult to read here. But these are the different technologies. And again, 1960, so now we're in 2020. So we're talking 60 years ago. They had this technology that could fly so fast from across the Atlantic Ocean. And again, they developed these things over long periods of time and just start to give it to us. We're going to witness 3 people. They're on the ground filming this. And you're going to see the cloaking devices as well, because I've said they cloak these, they camouflage these so you can't see them as well. So I'm going to leave the video here, and then below is some of my editions of the Paradise Fires we caught on tape as well.
It just went fuzzy all of a sudden. It went fuzzy. It's now a ball on my screen. It just went out of focus all of a sudden. I'll have to show you on the computer when we get home. Like it use a diffuser device. Yeah. It's there, but it's diffused itself. Maybe it hasn't diffused itself. That's the second one. First one went that way.
Okay, so people are saying this is some kind of a weapon. Seems kind of great. I don't know. I can't explain that.
As he watched the flames engulf the property using a security camera app on his phone.
Maria Birrella, is at Paradise Ridge Winery, which burned down in the fires. Maria, good morning.
Good morning. A lot of wineries have been unable to assess the damage because there are still wildfires going on nearby, keeping them from their properties. As you can see, the family that owns the Paradise Ridge Winery came back to complete and utter destruction. In fact, where I'm standing right now is the path the grapes used to take before they headed into this burned out building where the wine used to be made. Few structures at the
Hey folks, and welcome to another video from A Plain Truth. I want to show you this video that was taken in Syria the other day, and it clearly shows there's drones, and this is from Industrial Surrealism, who chronicled the different types of crafts that are above us. These are refueling stations, but they center portals. You're going to see this video, and this is where it's coming out of these different designs up there. That's a TR3B. But coming out is, you see, out of their exhaust is where they create the chem fumes, release the smart dust, and that kind of thing. So let me show you this video. Let's see if I can get one more picture of the scalar waves you see emanating from behind the false cloud they use to mask these drones that are up there releasing these devices. And so let me just play this. And the craft is hiding behind that thick, when you see a thick white area in the middle, that's where the craft is. And you see the pulsating waves, those are scalar waves coming out from the craft. You see it pulsing up and out. See the pulses? So they're releasing energy, plasma energy, usually cold plasma, and those create scalar waves in the sky. They can use for communications. They can use for many things. But by lowering the frequencies at a lower level, they get a much more acute angles, and they can use much more, many more frequencies at much greater power. So that's just one reason of the many reasons they will put these up here. But clearly you can see behind the cloud, there's something pulsating energy into the clouds.
Welcome to another video from aplaintruth.info and questioning everything to find the truth. Again, we're going back to who is in our skies, Mr. Sean Gautreaux. He's done some amazing work that I just keep taking apart. And I did a piece, copied him on lightning storms, that they were artificial, created by these demonic drones up in the sky, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. There's a new video that just came out that's extremely compelling to make his case. But first, I want to talk a little bit about more of these crafts that are allegedly in the skies that are being used to create all this different type of artificial chemtrail weather with their demonic devices that are spraying back and forth. It could be relatively small, that are making the cloud coking and the ionizing the atmosphere. But what propels them? You see them coming out of the middle? Well, Mr. Gautreaux is theorizing that it's coming from these propulsion devices that are based on Tesla technology using carbon fiber. Well, this is from another site. Carbon fiber torus structure with gold wire windings placed integral to the structure. Each band of the windings is a separate electromagnetic that can be turned on and off by a computer. These multi-challenging windows allow a computer program to accelerate the mercury ferrofluid around the inside of the torus at tremendous speeds. And we know that the toroidal structure is the structure of the Earth and its entities and its dimensions. It has the North Pole center, the Antarctic Circle around it, and a toroidal field, just like we have a toroidal field around us, centered around our heart, which is the biggest magnetic frequency we have. And this is from the movie Thrive with the guy from Procter & Gamble. I can't remember his name. But it just runs on the same kind of electromagnetism that a lot of our alternating current Tesla technology comes from. We also know from what is in our skies in this artist rendition that he did, Mr. Gautreaux is showing us there's multiple devices, and we're going to get into a little bit more the types of devices and the ancient devices that are possibly in play here. And we have some possible pictures of these devices in the air, and we're getting more and more of them today. But just be aware that Lockheed and the rest of these guys, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, have these already in play. They already have these winged ships that look like just like the ones we are actually beginning to visually see up in the skies.
So is it really to say that these aren't up there when we're starting to see them? And this lightning presentation is going to show you even further. And in the next video on the subject, I'm going to get into the Anunnaki and the ancient Egyptians, and did they have this technology, and is that technology still being employed by us today, going all the way back to the Vedics and the Sundara Vimana, the spaceships that were in the sky back then that look very curiously like what we're here to. All right, so here's
They haven't been called. Their eyes haven't been opened.
Go over this video.
Here's how it's done. The initial electrical charge comes from one of the large ships, probably generated by the fan/coil engine. The charge travels along its spine and electrified pathways onto the next craft behind it. This craft relays the charge to the next one, and so forth, until the charge is funneled to the smaller ships hanging lower to the ground. Boom. Pick a target. It was an act of God, or men playing God.
All right, so this is sent to me, and I forget who sent it to me, but thank you, from Catastrophes Climatiques, and this is apparently from Australia. And take a look and see if you can see the ghost ships in here, but this is the artist's rendering of what he thought, Mr. Gautreau, at what is in our skies. Take a look at the video firsthand and see what you can see here. Did you catch the ships? See it right there in the upper left-hand corner? There's another one to the right. And we're going to break it down here a little more to show what these are like. But here's the sequence. I just took screenshots and took a sequence. And here you can clearly see, their ships up there emanating from the front, the back, and the sides. Look at that grow all around a central pointed area. This is all being concentrated, and it just continues to grow until you can clearly see the outline of the ship there on the right. It is clearly one of these ships that Mr. Sean Gautreau describes in his What Is in Our Skies videos, of some 30 or 40 videos of him watching, filming, and doing artist renderings. And he's concluded that there's many different ships that were being up there, which we'll get into a little later. But here, take a look at the lightning and take a closer look, and you can see the black outlines of the triangles there. You can see them going right through as we slow it down a little bit. Here's a evening charges coming in from different points in different areas, all being centered on one point. And then when we break that down, we see there's two different energies that will grow. See the ship? You see it right there, folks? It's right there on the left. You can see it. It's right there pointing the lightning down. It is artificial. It is in our skies. There's another one right there. It's right up there in our skies. This was taken in Australia, I guess, last week or so. But here it is. You see it right there on the left. You see that triangle? It's exactly what Mr. Gautreau has been describing. Case in point, proof positive, happened the other. Now we can see it another. There's a little farther in the video here where it creates a huge, massive lightning. So you see the structure on the left, the one in the middle, the one on the right, and there's another one above it. There's over 4 of these concentrating their energy towards one beam of one spot, and it's going to grow. And you can see again clearly, here's the ships, and it's growing. The lightning is growing. They're getting more power. They're getting more static electricity, and they're grounding it into the earth. And here you can clearly see the ships. It is like so self-evident. And there's another lightning storm going off this way. This is proof positive, folks. This is from another shot that I took from this guy's catastrophes. But look at the focus beam here. Look at how it comes down into one spot, and it just gains energy and power once it grounds with the earth. Clearly 3 distinct with the machine sitting in the upper left-hand corner and a big white ball that's only going to gain in strength, and looks like the one on the left is feeding the mothership of exactly what Mr. Gautreau was talking. Electronic Defense Task Force defense, offense, 2018, Major David Stuckenberg, Colonel Douglas DeMaio, and Ambassador Richard James Woolsey. LeMay Papers. You know about General LeMay. He carpet bombed Tokyo. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Bombamal LeMay, they used to call him, from the World War II. Electromagnetic Defense Force. Notice the third image of this triangle satellite takes on a big area of land with their quantum leap. The fourth is the image I posted yesterday on Triangulum. Directed energy weapons, lasers, and other EMS phenomenon are often undetectable until the effects are encountered. However, once the effects are encountered, it may be too late to mitigate its harmful effects. Aliens in paradise, indeed. Trouble in paradise. Do you see what I see? Then they won't let us put drones over to monitor and follow what they're doing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the Millennial Reign of Christ, Part 2, St. George and the Sevenfold Son. Now, the basic premise of this video is that the second coming of Jesus Christ, what if it's already happened? It's in our past, not in our future, from a biblical and Christian perspective. And just to recap a little bit, part one, there's a lot of verses which indicate that Jesus was going to be returning imminently. And this is just one chapter which sort of talks about it. And to set the stage, Jesus is just talking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, and they're asking him about the end times. And some of these verses, they're just talking about all the things that will happen, and like earthquakes, pestilence, wars, rumors of wars, all these things, false prophets, antichrist, the whole list of things you've probably heard before. And then another verse later on goes to talk about how the Son of Man will be coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So his return, he's coming back in the clouds. But here's the plot twist, same chapter, later on, verse 32, he goes on to say, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled, indicating that he's talking to his disciples. So he's saying, you will see these things. They will be fulfilled in this generation. And there's other verses that back this up. And this is just one of them. Revelation, the final book of the Bible, chapter 1, verse 7. And it goes on to say, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. There were some Roman soldiers who pierced Jesus, and it's saying even they will see his return in the clouds again. So they need to be alive to do that, right? So that's for us, that's in our past, way in our past. So this is indicating an imminence as well, and it backs up what's being said here about this generation. So I was looking at, after this Jesus's return, there's supposed to be the Armageddon, a major destructive event. And when I looked at what they term the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which is supposed to be a gradual fall over the course of roughly 100 years, you look at the damage that you see with what we're told is the Roman Empire, and it is quite extensive. And not only are things just completely destroyed, things are buried too in the bottom right. This is Rome, and I think it was in the 1930s. You have the videos of people trying to dig out Rome, and it's buried, like all these structures are buried under 20 feet of earth. So something pretty major happened. And even in overseas, where in England, they're finding buried Roman villas all the time, and they come up with different stories as to why they're buried. But I'm thinking this was all related to an Armageddon event, not some gradual fall of the Western Roman Empire and whatever BS story they made up about why this is buried. And they also find underneath cathedrals, this is in the United Kingdom as well, Exeter Cathedral, they were digging down for something else, and they stumbled onto a Roman bathhouse, didn't even know it was there. So again, and there's some story as to why it was like this. I'm thinking this is all related to potentially, I don't know for sure, I wasn't there obviously, but that's what I'm thinking. It's all related to an Armageddon event. Now, before I move on here, I just wanted to say, while looking into this cathedral, Exeter Cathedral, and other cathedrals, I was just wanting to know, like, do we even know, we always see organs in churches, do we even know, like, why is the organ, why are they in churches? Because they're in all of the cathedrals, right? It's like the standard, one of the standard pieces of equipment that's in these churches is an organ. And when you go to look up why are organs in churches, you find things like it remains an enigma and it's unclear. Now there's speculations, but they don't even know why these organs are even in these structures. And this is just Europe's largest pipe organ, St. Stephen's Cathedral, 1682 allegedly. But this thing is massive, and I think there's over 17,000 pipes. And again, something that keeps getting repeated over and over tells me there's a functionality to it other than just people listening to music. There's something to it, but the fact they don't even know, they don't know what's under a lot of these cathedrals, and they don't even know why these organs are there. I mean, everything with our history is just shrouded, and I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was kind of funny. They don't know why, but so after this, after the Armageddon event, Jesus returns, there's supposed to be 1,000-year reign of peace. But in our history, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, they talk about the Dark Ages of 1,000 years. So are they right? And there was just this period of this general nothing happening, bad conditions all the way around, or was it maybe the best time to be alive? So that's what we're questioning. And now there's just 2 more events that are supposed to happen after the 1,000-year reign of Christ ends. 2 other events are supposed to happen. One is that Satan is supposed to be let loose. And I think this is maybe where the events that we term the mud flood occurred, or in and around this time, potentially. So he gave the nations, and there's talk about a second resurrection. Revelation chapter 20, verse 5, the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. And of course, 1850s, we're looking at all these, looks like empty cities, the photos, and then you have an explosion of more population increases, and you have orphans, foundlings, orphan trains, just children everywhere, orphanages, and it's just, people showing up out of nowhere. So potentially, I'm thinking, this is, we're the second resurrection, and we're living in this time. So that's a quick recap, but now let's get on to some new stuff and talk about some of these topics I have prepared for you today. Now I want to talk about the curious case of St. George.
Okay.
Show me.
Okay, now this is, I found this pretty interesting because if you look at the last book of the Bible again, the book of Revelation, there's some verses that talk about Jesus's return, and that he'll be riding on a white horse, and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword. And when he comes back, he's coming back with the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses themselves. So he's coming back to wage war against the nations that are rebelling against him. So he's coming back for battle, and he's on a white horse. He's got a sword, and he's gonna take care of business, basically. So I wanted to touch upon this Saint George character, because when you look at this Saint George, he's Saint George's horse, and he's associated with defeating a dragon. But when you look at the exact details of his life remain a mystery. And this particular saint is the patron saint of not just England. You also have Venice, Genoa, Portugal, Ethiopia, and I think Germany, and even some other countries all claim this one saint as their patron saint. For somebody whose life really remains a mystery, that's kind of interesting. And as I mentioned, he's often portrayed mounted upon a white horse. And there's even coinage. They tell us it's from this date, the symbolism is very consistent. It's just, you have him on a horse, usually with a sword or a lance or a spear, and but it's across many different cultures. And there's all these statues of him as well. But, this is the Czech Republic, Prague, supposedly 1373. I don't know about these dates, but there are all these statues dedicated to this character who nothing of his life or deeds can be established. So people are making this character, this, character, St. George, he's the patron saint of countries. They're erecting statues and equestrian statues to him. Here's another one, Zagreb in Croatia, they say from 1887. We've got one from Stock, and there's a lot of these, but these are just some of them. This is from Stock. You've got Berlin in Germany, and it's just these consistent themes. So what I'm thinking is St. George might be some sort of tribute to when Jesus Christ returns in the clouds, and basically the defeat of Satan for the 1,000 years when he was thrown in the pit. Is this some sort of nod to Jesus Christ, actually, in his return? Because St. George is sort of associated with being a warrior, and that's what Jesus came to do, actually. And he's supposed to be really virtuous and all the character traits you would assign to Jesus. So I'm just wondering if that's what this is. And you even have these statues. A lot of them are bronze, but some are made out of wood. You even have these equestrian statues. They're inside. A lot of times they're associated with churches, and a lot of times they're inside churches. So this is St. Nicholas's Cathedral in Stockholm, Sweden, and this one's an awesome one. And it's an older one, but I don't know if I trust any of their dates. But it seems like a lot.
Well. Let's just pause this for a second. I want to, really say thank you guys for sticking around. And look what I had pulled up for tonight's study when we're going to go over fresh material. St. George and the Dragon. We'll be looking at that because I saw somebody's kind of jumping the gun on me there by putting lizard, and I'm going to be trying to make I'll be making a case, is this, really the legend of the dragon and Satan, thinking of, Revelation 20 verse 3, they bound that dragon, the serpent, the great Satan, they call him a serpent many times. What's this? I had a white dragon pulled up here. There's a couple of different dragons here. What's this? This is a wyvern. Legendary winged dragon. So this is all what's coming tonight. Angroff Hall is one of the few Tudor mansions that actually they went for it. That was their, they wanted the cockatrice as their symbol. And with all of the legends about, nobody, what came first, the chicken or the egg? How come there's no chickens mentioned in the Old Testament? What's going on with cockatrice? We'll be looking at that. But in the meantime, once again, I just wanted to say thank you very much. Kill the lizard was the advice from Lee Charles that brought about this rude interruption. And back to the video.
Immortalizing somebody whose life is a mystery, making him, he's like a lot to do about somebody that we don't know anything about really. So that's why I'm thinking there might be more to this St. George. This is another church, St. George Church in Antwerp, Belgium. And yeah, just really interesting. And somebody did a study talking about it was talking about crossing cultural boundaries, and St. George in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there was a cult of St. George, and he's one of the most extraordinary examples of cohabitation among different religious communities. So you had, we're told anyway, this Greek Orthodox, Latins, and Muslims shared shrines dedicated. They tell us he was born in Cappadocia and he was a Roman soldier. This St. George was. I can't rely on anything they're saying about him, but this he was sort of worshipped by all these different cultures, and that's kind of what the premise of this paper was, like trying to explain why that is. And there's this really interesting wood carved statue of, we're told, is St. George in Castoria, and I think this is in Greece. Now, the unique feature of this church in Castoria is a large wood carved statue of St. George, which is about 9 feet. I guess that would be approximately 9 feet. And of course, it's of unknown origin. And this is just to show you kind of what a typical male height relative to the statue would be. But you have, again, so you've got all these cultures worshiping this saint whose the details and origin of his life are kind of, they're a little bit mystery, like nothing's defined. He's the patron saint of all these countries. And I just, and he's associated with as being a warrior and virtuous and noble and just. And a lot of times he's depicted on a white horse with a sword, like, so everything that is sort of associated with his second coming in the clouds and how he's coming as a warrior and to be just and to establish his kingdom. I'm thinking, maybe there's some ties there. Again, we can't be sure. Food for thought. So, and that's going to take us to the book of Isaiah, which actually has a lot to say about the millennial reign of Christ. And we're going to look at a chapter in this particular book, and we're going to talk about the sevenfold sun.
Okay. Show me.
This chapter 30 of the book of Isaiah, which is in the Old Testament of the Bible. And this is just, it's talking about there's a after Jesus comes back, Armageddon has happened. Jesus sets out to establish his kingdom on earth. And there's this period of regeneration of the earth. And this is just one verse kind of talking about that, verse 23. So it's going to return to Eden-like conditions. Now, there's a really interesting verse in this chapter, and I think it might tie into some of the things that we see as well. And it's a little further down, Isaiah chapter 30, verse 26. There's a reference to the light of the moon and the sun, and it says, moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days. Now, there's this interesting reference basically to the fact there's not going to be nighttime. The moon will be giving off the light of the sun, and the sun is going to be supercharged. Now, it doesn't really say anything about heat, but it's talking about 7 times the brightness. So I'm sure there's other things happening to sort of make that manageable. But so you're going to have these more Eden-like conditions, much more light, and you probably will have a more moderate climate year-round. So why do I think that's interesting is because, again, we've been looking at this heating of historic structures, including church buildings, and there was this study done by the University of Cambridge, just pointing out, most church buildings prior to the 1800s, in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, and you could throw Russia in there. And there was this study again by it was University of Cambridge, and they were just looking at all these different churches and the best way to heat them, because no consideration was given for heating these structures. So I guess what I'm saying here is these structures were built during this time when the sun and the moon were giving off much more light, and the climate was much more moderate. So there was no winter. It never got cold. And if you look at the Palace of Versailles, these palaces were just impossible to heat. And we have stories that Louis XV decided to change his bedrooms from the main gallery to a smaller area of the palace because it was just too cold. In addition to waste management issues, they had a hard time heating this place. And when you look at it, it just, the idea that they didn't factor in keeping it warm or have a better answer than just a fireplace, it just doesn't seem logical. I mean, and we talked about the Palace of Versailles. If you just look at all the things they did just to get water to fountains, they had aqueducts, they had reservoirs, the pipes that sort of facilitated that, and they had a machine, the giant Marley machine, just to get the water from the River Seine 4 miles away. All of this engineering and heating and waste management for that issue, for that matter. They didn't plan for that stuff. So maybe I'm saying they didn't need to. And if you look at the palaces, for instance, another palace, the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, again, it was impossible to heat. They went through like 3 heating systems. They started with fireplaces. A portion of it burnt down. Then they went to some like centralized heating system, but it was too dry. People were getting nosebleeds and coughing, and so they had to unify the air, and they would cancel. Sometimes balls were called off due to extreme cold. So again, all of the engineering that went into the Winter Palace, but they forgot that winter is a factor. So I'm suggesting this palace was built at a time when the climate was moderate and it was just continuous daylight. And again, if you look at castles, most medieval castles would have been incredibly, and I think again they belong to this period of time when the climate was moderate. Now, even if you look at infrastructure, I've talked about this particular. Basically, it is a water tower. There's a standpipe in there, and there's a powerhouse behind it, pumping station, and it's all steam powered. But we're told this is Detroit, this Moorishly inspired minaret.
See, we'll let that video catch up a little bit. It looks like it might have been stalling for just a second. A lot of provocative thought going on in the chat room. Hoping you're excited. Lord willing, come back tonight. We're going to be getting more into dragons and fire-breathing, flying dragons. How does it relate to Revelation chapter 20, verse 3?
Design, and when you look in the history of it, it turns out that somebody had to be assigned to fix the problem of the pipes freezing, because the architect hadn't thought of keeping the pipes need to be kept from freezing. So they had to install a coal burning stove at some point to prevent, because it gets cold in Detroit. So the people who did all this, they forgot again. And I guess what I'm suggesting is it wasn't an oversight, but the climate conditions were different. And just look at this place. I mean, unbelievable, this place. And it's just, there's nothing left of this, by the way. This is just an overhead view. And like this entire structure is gone. The water tower's gone. And this back here is also gone as well. I think this structure here is the only one that's left. But I wanted to point out there's a gate that is also really impressive. And again, I would suspect this gate was built at the same time the rest of this park was built, whenever that was, but it wasn't when they're telling us. It was a lot older. But this, you've got all this infrastructure. They built all of the infrastructure, but yet the roads are still in horrible condition. It doesn't seem like and I guess what I'm suggesting is it wasn't an oversight, but the climate conditions were different. And just look at this place. I mean, unbelievable, this place. And it's just, there's nothing left of this, by the way. This is just an overhead view. And like this entire structure, and this back here is also gone as well. I think the structure here is the only one that's left. But I wanted to point out this: there's a gate that is also really impressive. And again, I would suspect this gate was built at the same time the rest of this park was built, whenever that was. But it wasn't when they're telling us. It was a lot. It's probably, or it was a lot older. But this gate is still around. But even in 1894, you've got all this infrastructure. They built all the infrastructure, but yet the roads are still in horrible condition. It just doesn't seem like a match. And they've got trolleys, but they're being pulled by horses. So just this inconsistency are guts, and I can't be certain, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was if that hand was tucked in there for the old hidden hand sign. But just this place was awesome. It was awesome. And just the last thing I wanted to hit is the New York Public Library. And again, they're telling us this is the main branch, and they're telling us it was established in 1895. But when you go in this place too, I mean, this is the main reading room, and you've got your oversized windows, elaborate ceiling. But as far as heating goes, if you go to the entrance, they have to put these airlocks in because they didn't actually design. Like when you open a door into a big expansive room, you're going to have a draft, and if it's cold out, that's not going to be good. So after the fact, you'll see these buildings with airlocks. Sometimes they're made out of wood, but you can always tell they were done after the fact. So I'm suggesting this structure was around during this this climate that was much more agreeable. And so I guess to sum up, I do believe we are living in this period of time after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. I think we're living in this time when the 1,000 years have expired and Satan's loosed to deceive us. And it made me think of this movie called Prince of Darkness from John Carpenter, 1987, which sort of has it's a really creepy movie, and it has that same theme that Satan is trying to get loose. But that's where I think we are. And I guess I'll leave it here for today. But until next time, take care. Bye.
From the Paris of today. These photos were taken before Houseman's renovation took place. Thanks to photographers such as Scalar, we're able to take a glance at the old Paris.
Ils ont abattu le immeuble, la salle du vent. Ils en ont recréé 30 000. Ils ont créé 300 km de voirie. Ils ont créé 600 km d'égouts. C'est un travail colossal. Quand on voit avec quoi ils ont travaillé, c'est avec des kiosques, des pelles, il n'y a rien.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the renovation of Paris question mark. Now, this layout of Paris and a lot of the structures that you see today, or that we see today, was actually the product of a vast public works program commissioned by Emperor Napoleon III between 1853 and 1870. Now, we're going to just take a look. I'm just questioning this entire endeavor, and we're going to look at all of the things that were accomplished in this relatively short period of time. But let's talk about some of the key players here. So we've got Napoleon III, who was the nephew of Napoleon I. And this Napoleon, he was the first official president of France from 1848 to 1852. But then when he realized that he couldn't be constitutionally reelected, he seized power by force in 1851. And that led to him establishing the Second Empire. So he was also considered the last French monarch from 1852 to 1870. Defeat, him and his army, they suffer a defeat to during this Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and he's captured, and that's the end of the Second Empire. But during this period of time, during this Second Empire, which is roughly 18 years, he starts this vast public works program, which lasts 17 years, and he hires or puts this administrator in charge, this Baron Haussmann. That was his kind of one of his titles. But he charged this person with modernizing Paris, to bring clean water and modern sewers, as well as all the a lot of lights, gas lighting, construction of central market, parks, schools, hospitals, asylums, prisons, administrative buildings, apartment buildings, as well as all these avenues and their layout, which is quite an impressive feat considering the technology involved. But this article is just mentioning the most ambitious aspect of Haussmann's plan was to literally reshape the city. Agreed. And basically, Paris is laid out in this very interesting pattern, but according to the narrative, prior to 1860, it was composed of 12 of these administrative districts, and then I think they annexed more land according to the narrative, so it doubled in size, and now I believe there's about 20 of these administrative districts. Okay, so this project, it starts in 1853, and it involves this project. It was executed in 3 phases over 17 years, and it involved the demolition of almost, as mentioned in the intro, almost 20,000 structures, and the construction of upwards of 30,000 new structures. And again, we're talking people with pickaxes, shovels, sticks of dynamite, horse and buggy. And they started in 1853, and by 1855, it was the first boulevard built by Haussmann, and it served as the model for others. So like all of this progress in 2 years, and that's not even including like the planning phase, right? They would have had to have been all kinds of plans and before this even transpired. So this got me intrigued. Just that doesn't seem realistic. And as mentioned, these boulevards, these really wide boulevards that are almost 100 feet, and a lot of these apartment buildings that are usually about 5 to 7 stories, but these and they have wrought iron balconies, a lot of glass, and they're not just plaster on top of brick. Before Haussmann, most buildings in Paris were made of brick or wood and covered with plaster, but he required that the buildings along these new boulevards be built, either built or faced with cut stone. So that's a step up from just plaster. And in addition to all of the apartment buildings that they built, they also built 2 new train stations, a new church, or sorry, several new churches, a central fresh food market, and probably most impressive to me is what they did with their sewer systems. They completely renovated it, and they needed to get more water coming into the city. So they had to build new aqueducts, reservoirs, pumping stations. And in addition to all of that, they also expanded the sewer system by adding over 1,000 kilometers of new sewers. 1,000 kilometers. Now, I've heard numbers also mentioned that say 600 kilometers. So somewhere between 600 to 1,000 kilometers of new sewers. And these sewers, you could stand up in these sewers. And again, we're talking about people with pickaxes, shovels, horse and buggy, dynamite. It just seems really ambitious. It seems really ambitious. And also 2,000 kilometers of underground water pipes threaded throughout Paris's sewers are mirrored above ground by 470 kilometers of aqueducts. So these underground water pipes, as you can see here at the top, now 2,000 kilometers of those, just for some reference, like Paris to Budapest is about 1,200 kilometers. So just in water pipes, you're covering that, basically that distance plus some. And let's see, what did they say? 600 to 1,000 kilometers of just sewers in and of themselves. So like at least halfway if you're going with 600 kilometers to Budapest. And that's just in sewers. And they did all that in 17 years. It's just, wow. But, and again, you know, all of the processes you would need to pull that off, all of the competencies you have to develop, and all that takes time. And there's things you can't even account for, right? So apparently an accurate topographical map was commissioned for the first time during this period. But this article was just saying, like, no one knew, for example, how to measure underground water sources, or how to cut a trench through sandy soil that would be large enough for the diameter of sewer pipes necessary to drain a city. So there's just all of these problems. There would be all this trial and error, and to just pull that all off in this period of time just seems pretty unbelievable. But there's actually a museum in the Paris sewers, and it's it's still accessible even to this day. Now, when you start looking into old Paris, the medieval Paris that they were trying to renovate, you can actually find lots of photos, and upwards of like 300 to 400 photos of what we're told is old Paris. And here's just 4 of them. And all of these photos are coming from one individual, Charles Marville, and he was primarily the sole photographer for this Baron Haussmann during this renovation. So all these photos are attributed to him. But so there's plenty of actual photos of what we're told the before of Paris is, but when you start looking at the actual reconstruction phase, which again is supposed to be 17 years, the whole city is supposed to be a giant construction site, you start running into drawings and engravings and basically sketches. And here's just another one, and here's a third one. And again, they're ripping up all the roads, they're widening all these roads, creating these boulevards, in addition to the demolition of 20,000 structures. the reconstruction, the building of 30,000 structures with pickaxes, shovels, dynamite, horse and buggy. So when I start seeing this, some red flags are raised. But eventually you finally do come across a few photos that they tell us are the construction. And I'm just going to show you 3 here. And this one's we're told the construction of an avenue here. And, we see some people posing, and it almost looks like a war zone. So what we're told here is that these structures you're seeing in the background, a lot of them are being demolished for this renovation that's happening. But if this is indeed a legitimate photo that we're viewing here, is this a destroyed city? Is it being misrepresented to us? And again, that's just an open question. I don't know. Here's another photo building of this avenue here. And you've got what looks like a destroyed city. But again, we're told this is a demolition of these old buildings and a renovation and a creation of new structures. So, I don't know. It's an interesting question. Here's just another one. We have bricks, rubble, debris everywhere, and we're told this is all for the renovation. So I'm kind of wondering, are we looking at a destruction of Paris, actually, an event that destroyed it, and they're renovating that, as opposed to just an intentional destruction? And could these photos be older than we're being told? But there's a lot of good before and afters, actually. There's a little river island in the River Seine that's part of Paris. And there's some good before and afters that makes me think some work was done. On this particular island, I think here in the background, I believe this is the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris is on this little river island. And I think this is that cathedral. And so just pay attention to this. And there's this structure, this dome over here. So, it looks like you kind of have a construction site here. And this is going to be the future site of the Prefecture de Police. So here's a before. So this would be from the 1860s. And here's an after. And here's that Prefecture de Police, built in 1863. So here's the Notre Dame Cathedral, I believe, or part of it. Here's that dome. So here's, again, this area right in front becomes this structure here. So it looks like I don't actually see anyone. I see some materials laid out. But this is kind of about as good as it gets. But there's some interesting before and afters as well. We're told this top left photo here is old Paris. And they're saying the building towards the left with the rounded windows still exists today. And so you got this structure here, and on the right, you see this, it looks like the same building. And in the back here, down this one street, you have this theater, which it looks like, it's still there to this day. So, it looks compelling enough, but the actual evidence of them doing things seems to be absent. So it's just this really interesting dynamic. And here's another particular road or avenue or street. And this structure is still here at the bottom. This is a more current photo, obviously. And it's still there today. And it looks like this could be manipulated, but, even if it wasn't, I'm not really questioning the fact that there were, Paris was in a state of ruin and it got renovated. It's just, when did it happen? And was it actually like a destruction of the city that they're renovating as opposed to an intentional sort of upgrade? But, yeah, so those are just some open questions. But so this period of time that they're going through this massive, one of the biggest projects in recent history of the renovation of a city, they decide to have a universal exposition in 1855. So they start this renovation in 1853. And yeah, just like a couple of years into that, let's just have a universal exposition visited by over 5 million people. And I think the population of Paris at this time is like 1.6 million people. So as if they don't have enough on their plates, they have this universal exposition, but it gets better. They decide to have another one in 1867. This one visited by 15 million people now. The first exposition, I don't know how many buildings actually were erected, to go along with that, but this particular exposition, 100 structures were constructed or built, we're told, to go along with this universal exposition. So on top of the complete renovation of the city of Paris, above and below ground, you're going to have two universal expositions at this time. So it's just it's just sort of getting harder and harder to sort of believe that they're doing all this at the same time. So that's interesting, that whole dynamic. So so it's from 1853 to 1870 is this renovation. And then what happens in 1870, end of 1870, early 1871, there's Napoleon III gets in a war, the Franco-Prussian War, and he's captured and his army is defeated, and the Prussians basically siege. There's a siege on Paris, and Paris is bombarded by artillery, and there's a lot of destruction. And then after that, the Prussians leave. There's this provisional government that sort of took over trying to defend the city, because the rest of the army was in, I think they were in Versailles or something like that. And so, but then they didn't want to relinquish power. So there was a conflict, and while they were eventually removed, this provisional government, they decided to burn everything. So you got all this, you got a siege, and you got this rogue provisional government burning everything, right after all of this renovation. It's just this weird dynamic. And here's just some photos. This is I'm going to show like maybe 6, 7, or 8 images here. And it's just a combination of some of the damage done by the commune. It was called the Paris Commune, this provisional government that decided to burn everything on their way out, and also the bombardment. So here's just some of the damage that was done, we're told. And the city, it looks like a lot of the cities we see burnt by fire in the United States and in Canada. But yeah, just the damage. So what I just kind of have these 4 images here. On the left is photos from we're told, the demolition of the intentional demolition. And on the right, these are the images we're told are for the bombardment, the siege of Paris. So especially the top left and the top right image, they look, eerily similar. Like if you could have told me the one on the right was from the demolition and the one on the left was from the bombardment. Like there's I'm just wondering if all this is one event, is where I'm going with this. Are we looking at one event that destroyed the city and they just kind of rebuilt it? And in addition to that, I was thinking about Charleston, the Great Fire of 1861, all the damage done. And then you had the siege of Charleston during the Civil War, right? And all the damage done with that. So you start looking at this same pattern. You've got on the left-hand side, you had the renovation of Paris in the 1853 to 1870, followed by a destruction event, the siege of Paris, the bombardment of it. And on the right, you have this great fire of Charleston, followed by a siege. And it really looks like the same damage in both places. And I'm just wondering if this is sort of a script. Like, was there really one event? I think that's the speculation with Charleston. We're looking at one disastrous event, and I'm wondering if that's the same thing we're seeing with Paris. But it's sort of divided into a renovation and a siege, as opposed to just one of destructive event. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. It just seems a lot like the whole renovation in 17 years, and there was more renovation that happened, by the way, after obviously 1870. But what they said they did, just 30,000 structures. What was it? 20,000 structures demolished. Again, people with dynamite and pickaxes and shovels and able to pull and then to build 30,000 structures. And these apartment buildings are beautiful. Like, they're really nice and cut stone. And we're talking about the sewer systems and the universal expositions and like the churches and the central markets and the schools and I can't even, all the municipal buildings and the operas. Like, it's pretty mind-boggling. So I don't know. This is sort of an introductory video on all this, and I just wanted to present it to you guys, and I think I'll leave it here, but until next time, take care. Bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another video. Today, we're going to be talking about the Defacers, and this is all in reference to the controllers and how they like to put their stamp on structures. And also, we're going to be touching on how they like to create false associations with regards to structures. But first, we're going to start by looking at this phenomena called the Green Man and something referred to as mascarons. The Green Man. What is the Green Man? You could see here this little image, the Green Man in New York City. Just reading this real quick. The Green Man can be found on many buildings in England, and the face adorns buildings in Germany, France, and other places. And it's referred to as the Green Man, and it's a face that you will see on buildings a lot of times above doors, above windows. And this particular face, it has foliage usually streaming from its face. But it can also be found in the United States, particularly in New York City. Now, prior to, I think it's like the late 1800s, this thing went unnamed. It was just a feature that no one really paid much attention to. But this person by the name of Lady Raglan, and her husband was a major apparently, who also goes by the title Fourth Baron Raglan. Okay, but she wrote an article talking about this face in the late 1800s, which appeared a couple times. But she was the first person to give this face the name of the Green Man. So I wanted to see if there was if we could tie this to some group. And before I get to that, here's just one more. These are some of the faces of the Green Man in New York City. And the Green Man made a big comeback in architectural ornaments used everywhere starting in the late 1800s. So there's a lot of different variations of it, but it goes by that name. And so there's a term mascaron, and I know that's not the French way to say it, but I'm just going to stick with that for now. But in architecture, a mascaron ornament, it's just a face, usually human, but sometimes its function was to frighten away evil spirits so that they would not enter the building. I'm going to guess it probably has some completely opposite function, but you can just see some of these mascarons. And when I did some digging, it led me to Bordeaux, France, and this particular city is known for just an abundance of these faces, these mascarons, and nobody apart from some tourists probably seems to notice the stone faces called mascarons. Now, when you start digging into this Bordeaux, and it's referred to sometimes as the city of 3,000 faces, they're just everywhere. And here's just, some of these faces. And, I can't help thinking it's the controllers. They're just putting these things on structures that maybe were already there and just sort of claiming them. But when you go into the history of Bordeaux, you come across, of course, Freemasons. Bordeaux hosted more than 2,000 Masons in the late 1700s. And several Bordeaux masks or mascarons from the late 1700s show signs of Freemasonry, and we're going to take a look at this particular one here. And it's this particular address has a Masonic symbol on its chest, and so a lot of these mascarons have Masonic symbolism. So again, and that's a group we associate with the controllers. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it ties all back to them. And again, they're just a part of a much larger control mechanism. But you also find these in Bucharest as well, which is referred to sometimes as Little Paris of the East. I'm going to guess if we dug a bit further, we would find a Masonic connection there as well. But I just wanted to mention that real quick, bring that up. The Defacers, yeah, they're I would assume these probably put on after the fact, and these structures probably were already in situ, in place. But now let's talk about the second subject here, which is going to be stained glass. We talked about the defacers. Now let's talk about the replacers, but sticking with the theme of the controllers, they might be deceiving us with regards to the association that cathedrals have with religions. And I think stained glass is one of the ways they've masterfully done that. So we're going to take a look at this real quick. So the term stained glass just refers to colored glass as a material and to works created from it. Now, it's almost exclusively associated with the windows of churches and other significant religious buildings. So, they've associated, it's so imprinted in our minds that there's this association because, of course, they have all these biblical scenes being depicted. But again, we're going to delve into this. So when you look at the obscure beginnings of stained glass, right away we get into many histories of stained glass begin with Pliny's tale of the accidental discovery of glass by Phoenician sailors, and then they go into the legend recounts. So we're into tales and legends again, and when dealing with stained glass and things related to these cathedrals, these churches, and again referring to the cathedrals, these are the same structures where when they dig down to build a car park, they find Roman bathhouses they didn't know were there. And I talked about this in the previous video. Even these organs, which are beautiful, and some of them have thousands of pipes. And when you try to go figure out why are they in all of these cathedrals, again, this is what you will find, that they say it remains an enigma, and it's not clear how the organ came to be such a standard church instrument. So when I see Now, when we look at stained glass that's associated with these cathedrals, and we're talking about tales and legends, it's just our history suspect. So one of the oldest windows, stained glass windows, is supposed to be from this particular monastery, St. Paul's Monastery. I don't know how to, Jarrow, UK. And they were excavating. The windows were actually broken, and they were excavating in 1973, and they found all this colored glass, this stained glass. So they rearranged it, but there were blue, green, gold, and yellow pieces. So they actually rearranged, they just put them together, compiled them into collages, and you can go and view this, but it's touted as like the oldest stained glass window. So I kind of think this is sort of what actually was in all these cathedrals. And the biblical scenes that we see, I think that is a more recent addition. And I'll explain why I think that here. But so now when we go into these these bigger cathedrals and churches, you start looking into it, and you find that the stained glass windows, they were complex and illustrated the stories of the Bible and the lives of the saints. But however, the artists were not interested in how realistic the designs were. Many times they were very unsophisticated paintwork. And you go on to read, the colors were often uneven and streaky. But then later on, you get to the point where they start to become more advanced, and they use perspective and other techniques that painters use. So there's this sort of evolution that happens. And I find it really interesting because you have these massive cathedrals and completely just innovative with their designs on such a massive scale and so advanced for the time. And you look at that and you contrast that with these windows, which are of a poorer quality from an artistic perspective. It just always seemed a bit odd to me. And just knowing how the controllers like to try and make associations for us, like if these structures were from a time where things were a lot different, and they're trying to make the association to religion. So that was in my mind. And then when I started reading this, well, this just kind of sealed it for me. During the 1700s, the removal of medieval stained glass was commonplace. The windows were destroyed and replaced with painted glass. So almost all of the stained glass windows with the biblical scenes that you see are modern. Well, they're reproductions, probably most likely from the 17 and most likely from the 1800s. In the mid-1800s, due to the revival of the Catholic Church in England, there was a resurgence in Gothic architecture. So many new churches and cathedrals were built, and many old churches were restored. So massive restoration. This resulted in the rediscovery of medieval stained glass techniques. Blah, blah, blah. So, and this is just another one talking about French Gothic stained glass windows. What they say was over 400 years. A large part of the original glass was destroyed in the centuries after the Middle Ages. Much of the glass today is restored or a more modern replacement. So everything you're seeing in all of these fancy, more realistic biblical scenes that you're seeing in all these churches are reproductions, recreations by the replacers, I believe, which is, I think, the controllers. And I think they're doing it to make us connect these structures to religions. And I should say, I am a Bible believer, or at least some of the versions, but I'm not a believer in man-made religions. And so I just want to, I am bashing on religion, man-made religions, but I'm not bashing on the Bible. So I think that this is probably closer to the reality of what was in these structures. And I'm going to touch on this in probably my next video as to maybe what I think was going on. I think they had an effect. And yeah, so I'll leave it there. But, you know, and when we look at this, this concept of, like, they have a few tools they can use to create associations for us. One of them is stained glass. Another is frescoes, right? The churches. So I was talking about this in a previous video. In Ethiopia, in the northeast part of the country, there's this mountain chain, and there's all these rock-hewn churches, and some of them are like 1,000 feet in these mountains. And the people in these communities where these churches are, they didn't even know about these churches until the late 60s and early 70s. But when they did find them, they found these frescoes, and we're told they suspect these frescoes are from the 1400s. So I got another image here, just give you a better perspective. But again, you look at some of these frescoes, it just, you know, I'm not artistic, but pretty amateur, pretty amateurish. And not only that, you look at the structure and it is weathered. And again, we're talking about 30-foot tall ceilings, and they've got cupolas and all these arches. And I mean, in its day, it would have been very impressive. But then you got something that's seemingly really well preserved in relation to the original structure, but it's of worse quality. And, you know, look at all this, whatever happened here. I don't know if this is natural erosion, but then you contrast it somehow. Again, these frescoes, they seem to be doing way better than the structure that they are in. And I'm thinking these are a recent production, much more recent than the 1400s. And, you know, you look at even in here, all this weathering, and then right next to it, they're doing okay. I think these were planted, you know. And here's another church in Ethiopia, one of these rock-hewn cave churches. And this, I mean, like, look how massive this structure is. And we're told they did this with like stone tools. And again, it's weathered, but it was awesome. I mean, a lot of engineering went into this. And then you got this sort of amateur-ish fresco, which again, really well preserved relative to the structure, which makes me think it's a more recent plant. And, you know, I talked about this in the classical art deception, Pompeii and Roman paintings. The thing with Pompeii, it was devastated by Mount Vesuvius, and you had these pyroclastic flows which get up to 700 degrees Celsius. People were just, you know, many people died, but somehow these frescoes the heat didn't seem to affect these frescoes they found, which gave us this massive insight into the life of Romans and their day-to-day, their religious beliefs, all this. And again, I think these are a plant. And I'm starting to see a pattern here with structures that are in worse shape than the frescoes. I guess that's all I wanted to say on that. And I'll be talking about stained glass more in my next video. So I just want to do some previous video updates. So let's talk about that. Okay, the first video update, I'm going to do two here, is talking about a video I did called The Golden Age Amusement Parks and Infantoriums Part 3. And I talked about this lady, Marie Dressler. She adopted one of those incubator babies from the infantoriums, where people in amusement parks, turn of the century, 1900s, early 1900s, they had exhibits. You could see living infants. That's how they worded it. And she was this really famous person. There's Charlie Chaplin. But so she adopted one of these incubator babies, and I just doing a little more digging. In 1933, her name was Marie Dressler. She was the first woman to grace the cover of Time magazine. And yeah, I feel like there should be a question mark on that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I got an interesting comment from Jack S. And he just was looking in the Wikipedia entry under Mary Dressler, and he said she didn't have that baby long. And he quotes this sentence that's in her Wikipedia entry. Some sources indicate Dressler had a daughter who died as a small child, but this has not been confirmed. So it's pretty clear she did adopt a baby, and here we go. Here's one article. She adopted a baby, and here we have another one talking about the incubator baby she has adopted. So it's interesting that they're talking about her having a daughter who died as a small child. So now there's two things that I found. Well, one thing I found, but this picture I find extremely disturbing. I just want to show you this real quick. This is the stuff of nightmares right here. Look at this. I'm hoping this is like a fake prop or something. I'm hoping that's not a real infant, because that just, I don't know, something evil about that look. But this is a part that's a little disturbing. I was reading this article that I found, and I'm just going to read it for you here. So Marie Dressler, she's talking about the adopting of this child, and she's saying, I know it's a little blurry, but I'll read it here. She's just saying she adores. I simply adore babies. Now, I highlighted this portion here. What am I going to do with it? Why raise it? Of course, I've called it Marie. Now, this is a really disturbing part. And if the dear little cherub survives the christening, I'll do everything on earth. I'll do everything on earth to ensure its welfare. And if the dear little cherub survives the christening, I'll do everything on earth to ensure if it survives, man, that is disturbing. I know this was over 100 years ago, and you don't want to pull something out of context, but that is, as a turn of phrase, that is disturbing. I can't even imagine, if it survives, who would say that? And, when I just hear that, and then I'm reading this article, and this child there's no real reference to this child outside of this one entry. So, yeah, just disturbing. This whole aspect, everything about it is just disturbing. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And there's just one other video update that I wanted to make, and it's talking about liquefaction. Now, when you have these massive earthquakes, usually if they're over a magnitude of 7, you get liquefaction happens. And now, not only do things sink or tip when you have liquefaction, but there's a process where the water underneath the ground, it gets heated, and it mixes with the sediment, usually sand, and it comes up and it's squeezed to the surface as a liquid, and then it just keeps flowing, and then it solidifies back into whatever the sediment was, usually sand, but it could be clay, or it could be silt. So that's what you have here, and I don't really think I mentioned that. I don't think I did a good job of describing that. So I want to play a 30-second clip so you could see what that looks like.
Oh my God. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
So, yeah, how would you like to see that in your backyard? But sometimes they refer to these things as sand boils. And this is just a photo here talking about, I think the caption on it was these sand boils in a silt-covered street after the 2011 Canterbury earthquake. So, you know, you get all of this sediment that comes to the surface as a liquid, and then it turns back into its natural state. So, you know, that's just something to think about, because liquefaction has a lot of different aspects to it, and this is just one of them. And I just wanted to mention that. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I guess next episode I should be hopefully hitting on the stained glass a bit more. So until next time, take care. Bye.
Revolt of their own accord, and they never revolt merely because they are oppressed. Indeed, so long as they are not permitted to have standards of comparison, they never even become aware that they are oppressed. And this week's opening quote comes from George Orwell. And we know there have been massive depopulation programs that have been carried out on this earth. You know, we can just look at Bolshevism and see what happened there, which is an extremely disturbing part of human history, and yet it is there. We can find the remains of at least 6 million people just in a 2-kilometre section of tunnels under Paris. This is something that I also touched on previous shows. And the interesting thing about all of these bodies that are stacked up, femurs and skulls, and just stacked like rolls of parchment, and with skulls forming sigils in the walls in these Paris and catacombs beneath Paris. The interesting thing about them, folks, is that all of these skulls and femurs are very, very clean, like they've all been boiled. You know, we're told that they simply relocated the cemeteries, but who would have done that? And imagine the gruesome job of digging up all those graves and relocating all those bodies and then stacking femurs and skulls in the walls. Where would be the point where you boiled all of these bones along the way? This is all very, very disturbing, folks, but we can find massive amounts of evidence all over the world which clearly indicates that our history is simply not what we're told. And like I said, you know, when you really start looking into it, you can find evidence that there appears to be cyclic cataclysms and that our history has been completely fabricated. And that this has happened quite recently. You know, like we're just within the last couple of 100 years, within the last 150 years. When you start really looking into the stories of the orphan trains and the families, and ask yourself, how many of your grandparents were orphans? How many of your grandparents were brought to countries and settled as orphans? How many of them were on orphan trains? These are questions we've never asked our grandparents. These are memories that go way back, and we just don't think about these sorts of things. It's not something that we ever considered because we've always considered the timeline to be true. We've just accepted it.
Hey folks, and welcome to another video from A Plain Truth for You and Well Healed too. It just keeps getting more interesting as we dig deeper. Literally today we're digging deeper under the 200 miles of catacombs under Paris, France from the 1800s. That was Max Egan who did this report. I'd never heard anything about it, so I've been doing some research on it along with the Tartarians, and I have some questions we'll get into. But I mean, the amount of burial grounds we're talking about, I mean, look at all these skulls. And these were skulls and femurs. Why did they only keep the femurs? Why didn't they keep the others? Literally skull and bones, get it? So there's millions, like 6 million underground here in the Paris catacombs. Where'd they come from? Who put them there? Why are they there? I mean, it's elaborate. It's definitive. It's like art they made this stuff out of, folks. So let's get into it a little more. This means caution, you're entering the empire of the dead. And look at the stone columns. These are like 5 stories underneath Paris. Who knew? All right, before we get into that real quick, I want to just use the number 6 million. Remember, it was 6 million Jews that got allegedly exterminated by Germany in World War II. Well, we know that's not true anymore. I'll show you here in a minute, but look at here. America saved 6 million in Russia. Massacre threatens all Jews. What's the date? 1921. 1921, they were using the term 6 million. And then Auschwitz conveniently reduces the number from 6 million down to 1 million. They even got a plaque that changed to use the new current number. 4 million people suffered here, and here they changed the number. Wait a minute, a 2.5 million people mistake. So question everything. It's not what you're really allowed to question. There wasn't that Zyklon B bug spray was used to delice people, not to kill them. So that's just been a whole big lie. Also, they don't cover, the whole Jewish being critical of the Jewish people and not acknowledging the Holocaust. Well, what about the Holocaust in Russia? This is the Tartarians that were eliminated. 30 million murdered. 30 million. How does that pale to 6 million, folks? Oh, by the way, the United States and Russia, the U.S. bankers backed them going up and kicking out the Tsar in World War II, put them in sealed trains with 5 million in gold. But that's another story in itself, all right? So let's get back to this story on the catacombs. There were more than 200 miles. This is the Smithsonian. I remember the Smithsonian is owned by the Rockefellers, who used all their money back in the 1910s and 20s to get on the board to control all the history and narrative. So you're seeing theirs here about their history. 200 miles of tunnels just under the City of Lights, some lined with ceiling with skulls and bones. So in the 17th century, 1600s, enough people had lived and died in Paris that the cemeteries were overflowing, overstuffed with graves to the point where corpses at times became uncovered. And so the solution arose to place them in centuries of old tunnels that existed beneath the streets in the 13th century. So they're really saying they ran out of room. The remnants of the time when limestone quarries were mined to build Paris into a thriving city, 5 stories down, folks, 1600s, 13th century, 1200s, they were building tunnels. What did they use to build them? Horse and buggy and picks and shovels. 5 stories down, elaborate design, as you'll see here. By the time these barrows ended, 6 million, there's that number again, Parisians' bones, came to their final resting place. All right, so they're saying that it was because there was too many people and they ran out of room to bury them. But here all you have to do is look at the population growth, 1700 to 1800, and we see some population growth. Yeah, it increased in Habsburg. This is the Russian Empire, Prussia, Russian. You add those two together, all three together, and you've got a huge increase in population from 17 to 1800. But here you see France, 19 to 21 and a half, an increase of 1.5 million people, 2.5 million people, but nothing, and then 21.5 to 28, but nothing like the growth you're seeing in 20 to 37 in Russia. So are these the remains of the Tartarian Empire is my question. All right, so getting back to this article here. So those living in Les Halles has got to mean hell, near Les Innocents, the city's oldest and largest cemetery, were among the first to complain, reporting that the cemetery exuded a strong smell of decomposing flesh. Even perfume stores claimed they couldn't do the business of off-the-putting the smell. So they're saying it was because of the smell, but if you notice, if you paid attention, Mr. Egan talking about, they boiled the bodies. They boiled them, and all they used was skulls and femurs. If they boiled them, they wouldn't be smelling, right? And what did they do with the extra bones? What did they do with the tibias and spine and everything else? Just femurs and skulls. So it wasn't until 1780 that anything was done about it. This is their story. A prolonged period of spring rain caused the walls around Les Innocents to collapse, spilling rotting corpses into a neighboring property. The city needed a better place to put its dead. Oh, because of rains, the walls collapsed. So it went to the tunnels, moving the bones from cemeteries 5 stories underground in Paris's former quarries, emptied in 1786. Remember this, 1776, 1786 are getting to be big numbers. From bodies numbering between 6 and 7 million into the catacombs. Some of the oldest date back as the Moravian were more than 1,200 years ago. The city stopped moving bones into the ossuaries in 1860. The tunnels extended more miles into the city, but it's illegal to visit areas. So 200 miles of tunnels, you're only allowed to see a little bit of it. There may be massive, massive bones. And then, as I said, as visitors pass into the ossuary, they walk under the doorway with a haunting inscription, "Stop, this is the Empire of Death." Did they eliminate the Tartarian Empire? So what is this Les Innocents cemetery about? Well, it turns out the Bisphoric of Paris, the Bishop of Paris, opened its cemeteries to merchants in an attempt to reclaim part of their monopoly over the Paris trade. And here, central Paris's first Christian burial ground dates from the early 4th century. Bury of innocents, folks. They're burying the innocent people. Just north of the Rive, partisan population moved after the fall of the Roman Empire. First churches appeared with the spread of Christianity. No, the Tartarians, the Christians, the Jesuits took over. Their foundations became crypts for those seeking the resting place closer to God. Because of the high price of the service, it was only accessible to the wealthy. Still true today. Paris owned much of the lands and tax rights over central Paris, so a marketplace next to the cemetery to better monitor the trading. Why would they want the cemetery next to the marketplace? To assure that they got their share from trading. The Les Champeaux burial ground was known as Saint Opportune Cemetery, opportunistic. And then the Bisphoric of Paris opened its cemetery to merchants in an attempt to reclaim part of their monopoly over the Paris trade. I can't begin to understand what that means. Maybe you guys can. The burials rose in number with a religious fervor until the 13th century, 1200s. That's what we're saying. The Fomenko says, Russian says history began, 1200s. The doctrine of time tended towards fire and brimstone, which was all the better increase the flow of the defunct faithful into consecrated church property, accompanied by a sizable burial fee. You have to pay to die here. You get taxed when you die, same stuff, death tax. Tendency grew to such extremities that an edict drawn in 1235, all those who left nothing to the church, their last testament would be excommunicated, as well as a notary and witness of such will. So they're basically saying you can't go to God unless you pay us a tenth. The system had used all available ground by the end of the century. The holes were dug at 1,500 at a time. Around 1,400, they intimidated their richer parish members into donating enough funds to build long galleries inside of all 4 cemetery walls called charniers. When the cycle of the mass burials had filled the entire cemetery, the content massive underground.
I'm going to wait. There was just too much reading here. I know that after all these hours, you're in a visual mood right now.
Ancient undergrounds. Let's go to San Francisco.
As I pointed out to you previously, the sewer system in San Francisco really is remarkable. This is a multi-level, multi-story sewer system, which is huge. I mean, it's the size of the city, this sewer system, and it would have been years in the construction. Why is there no record of this ever being constructed? It's quite remarkable. Where would they even have got all the bricks to construct it at the time they did? And when we hear the stories of the gold rush and the way San Francisco was apparently founded, the construction of this sewer system simply isn't taken into account. This would indicate that there was a culture prior to this one that constructed that sewer system. And there's every indication that this culture was Tartarian in nature. We've also found things across the United States like aqueducts, which are found all across the United States, which are built in a very European Roman, we're told, style. These styles are depicted as being Greco-Roman, but we really don't know why they would use that term. I mean, why would there be people who are colonizing the United States building Greco-Roman style aqueducts? Greco-Roman also appears to be a cover story for Tartarian infrastructure.
All right, so under the San Francisco, which I knew there were underground bunkers back in the Presidio days when the Spanish Mexicans, were here at Crissy Field, San Francisco, right next to Golden Gate. I heard about all that, but I did not know about the massive, extensive sewer system under San Francisco as well. And you can see this area here. That's the Golden Gate along here. So you're coming along this California street, along the South Side Bay Bridge. These are all the underground tunnels that are marked all the way around this, looks like this southeastern perimeter that were dug up a long time ago. So we got to get the official story. This is from Streets blog. On the tour, others explained that as the settlement around the Mission and Potrero Hill grew, pollution in the estuary became unbearable. So they experimented with wooden box sewers, were failed. We already knew. I mean, they had sewer systems back in Europe a long time ago, folks. This is all, you know, oh, we're reinventing the wheel. We're putting in boxes and they don't work. Unintentionally creating highly fertile, highly unsanitary compost chambers. The first brick sewers appeared in the 1860s through 1880s. So the 49ers got here as a story. They ditched all their clipper ships. They ran out to find gold. They found the gold. They came back and they built sewers with bricks and a hodgepodge that emptied into creeks and marshes that smelled worse and worse over time. Finally, in the 1890s, Carl Edward Grunsky developed plans for an innovative gravity-based sewer that would carry waste all the way to North Point, where the rapid current would sweep into the Golden Gate or back out towards Oakland. So they're literally flushing their shit into the Oakland and San Francisco Bay Area. Now, depending on the time of day. It took years before the city built the pipeline, finally realizing during the construction boom after 1906 and silver industry laws, during which there was an excess of unemployed miners. Why were the unemployed miners? Did they come back because they stopped finding gold? Who knew? But take a look at these pictures, folks, about this underground tunnel here. And these weren't sewer tunnels. I mean, look at this stuff. Look at the carved concrete underneath. Look at the arches. Look at the stone all set and cut perfectly. So this guy went through all the, got down to go in there for an, I just talked about the Panama Pacific exhibition in San Francisco in 1915 on 75 acres. It was super elaborate. Well, here you see the tunnels were used to transport soldiers and materials, but it closed its gates in 1990. Standing between you and epic photos are two 20-foot gates, and you fear of descending into darkness. Again, we see the massive gates. Tartarians, were they underground here? Did they build these undergrounds down here? These weren't just for sewers. Remember they said they're for sewers? This gentleman saying they're transporting soldiers and materials. Look at the size. Look at the technology. How do you curve concrete? How do you make it curve like that? Inside it's dead silent. And after you get a good 10 to 15 feet in, deep inside, there's a Nukex sign that reads fallout shelter. So they're planning it for a fallout shelter. But you can see the carvings. Look at how slick the stone is. I mean, this in the design. Look at these caves. These are all under San Francisco as well. So again, early 1900s, we're seeing more and more evidence. Haven't found any evidence of bones buried down here, but again, major anomalies and major questions. So I'm going to close this on a macabre note, since we're dealing in waste and we're dealing in underground, we're dealing in cemeteries and whatnot. Many of you already know what these are, but these are called wet surface air coolers. They take water, spray it up to the sky. They combine with the barium that are being sprayed by geoengineering to make cloud condensation nuclei to make rain. Without these massive machines all across the United States and the world, you cannot generate the weather that they need to make it rain. We've destroyed the rain-making process for a very, very long time, over 2 decades ago, because of the coal ash from power plants as far away as China and here, has destroyed the cloud condensation nuclei that we used to make rain. So they have to artificially make it using these massive power plants that are provided out here in what's called the geysers that are in Northern California, right above Santa Rosa as well. So here's where it gets, I got to tell you this stuff because it's got to get out. All right, so Windsor is right above Santa Rosa. Windsor now sending its wastewater to the geysers. Thursday inaugurated a system will send millions of gallons of treated wastewater northward, connecting the geysers. Apparently the geothermal field from the wet surface air coolers wasn't producing as much water as they need to make the water vapors to send up into the sky to make it rain and affect the weather. And in addition, Santa Rosa is doing it as well. They're spending almost $750 million. And what they're doing is some 11 million gallons of wastewater, this is 2011, is currently piped to the geysers. So folks, literally, they are pumping wastewater to the geysers that are being sent up into the sky, and literally in Sonoma County and Lake County is doing it as well. We're being rained on with our own shit. No shit. Sorry to have to tell you, but that's what they do. Bohemian Grove is to the west. They don't have the same effects because it's getting blown from west to east off the coast. But literally, when it rains here, I stay inside. It's so gross, I can't believe it. Anyway, covered a lot of subjects here. Hope it helped. I'll be putting a lot of this stuff in the show notes. Stay tuned for more. There's more about the foundlings and the orphan trains from New York during the 1850s to 1925. 500,000 children and orphans were shipped on trains called orphan trains. That'll be in the next video or so. All right, Plain Truth out. Going underground. We got to get back up there.
All right. Thank you, Jamie Lee. And what we're going to be doing now is, just a short, tonight, Lord willing, or next time, we're going to be getting into the cockatrice, mythical beast, or the dragon of Revelation, the serpent-like creature with a rooster head. This is one of the places that, they have it on their crest. Different names it goes by: legendary winged dragon, bipedal, and there's white dragons. European dragons. So we're going to be looking into the myths of dragons tonight, or sometime soon. So I'll hope that you join me then. In the meantime, remember, it's a flat Earth nation. Mudflood was Armageddon, and I'm never going to tell you anything else. Why would I? Trying to prove that I have your best interest at heart. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho.